Chapter 2295. The Extreme King's Seeker. Han Sun looked at that man, who was similar to his age. He coughed awkwardly and hesitantly asked, So, what should I call you? In the past, Han Sun had received a secret Xianmen skill from the man, but the man said he wasn't going to take any students. And Han Sun was also able to obtain Dong Xianzi's legacy. He didn't know which of the two was a more important figure. The man laughed and said, Names are merely symbols. When someone practices as much as I have, they've already given such titles up. You should just keep on calling me Mr. White, to make sure that my identity within the Extreme King doesn't get exposed. You are going back to the Extreme King? Han Sun asked with surprise. Mr. White smiled and said, The Extreme King isn't some scary hole for beasts to fester in. There are many resources to obtain. To be fair, it is a fine place to continue with one's practice. Why wouldn't I go back? Then how are you going to explain what happened here? Han Sun asked, holding up the little box. Crime was dead, and Mr. White had given the box to Han. Senator Han Sun was afraid that if he returned, he would be unable to report to Prince 14. Everything will work itself out, if given the time. Use your heart. Think here and see. Hold on to everything you can in this world. There is a solution to each and every woe. After that, Mr. White gave Han Sun a card. This is what I have been thinking about over all these years. You can take a look, but remember, do not put the stock of your belief too deeply into anything. You still need to form your own opinions on things in this life. A portion of the real Xianmen requires one to practice with the faith of their own heart. I have no time to take care of it. My Xianmen legacy has probably come to an end on this day. You count as half of the Xianmen members. I hope that in the future, you will find a way to continue the teachings of the Xianmen and pass on my techniques. You don't need to ask anyone to join the Xianmen formally, but the Xianmen will be lucky enough just to have one or two out there that have really devoted themselves to the learnings. Visit website or list novel. Han Sun did not reject the plea. He gladly accepted the card he was given. He knew Mr. White wasn't too personally invested in all of this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given Han Sun Xuantian's secret skill before. There were many religions and parties working in the world, but most religions only taught a person what to do and what to believe in. Only Xianmen taught a person how to explore and find their own understanding of the world, their own connection within the workings of the universe. So, it would be very difficult for the Xianmen to become famous. It wasn't explicitly defined, so it couldn't compete on the same wavelength as other teachings and religions. That was because this teaching confused people. Most people wanted to be comforted. They wanted something to guide them through the hardships of life. But Xianmen was about having to think about things yourself. You had to take charge of your own fate and explore the unknown. The future was full of unknowns and variables. It was tough. People that didn't have the required intelligence or endurance could never make it through. So, it wasn't beyond belief that Xianmen fell into oblivion. The road of Xianmen was not one that many would willingly choose. After Mr. White spoke, he looked at the little box in Han Sun's hand. He said, If my assumptions about the box are correct, then it doesn't actually contain the sacred leader's treasure. It is just a red herring. The real treasure still resides someplace in Holy Town. But our combined strength still isn't enough to explore all of that town's secrets. When we have both become deified, we can return and resume exploration of the town. Mr. White, what is the picture upon my back? Han Sun still felt nervous when he thought about that painting. It was way too weird. Mr. White thought for a moment, then said, Ancient blood dragon lady's blood was used as ink. A picture was drawn upon your back. I couldn't see the picture, and so I can't make a sound assertion. But do not worry, as I have made some calculations of the future on your behalf. Following a terrible incident, there were still some good fortunes to be had. Whatever that picture was, it wasn't a bad thing. Good fortune following something terrible? That means something terrible is going to happen. Han Sun was shocked. Mr. White laughed and said, You're in for a rough ride. It would be nice if you didn't tell me these things so bluntly. Han Sun gave a wry smile. Mr. White quietly said, When you follow Isha back to Narrow Moon, you should be prepared. I believe that the Extreme King will eventually summon you to their ruler's kingdom. Han-sun was curious, so he had to ask, Mr. White, how did you end up becoming part of the Extreme King? Mr. White quietly said, I disguised myself as a hybrid of the Extreme King, so I could stay among them. I was drawn to their resources, but I also learned something very interesting there. I stayed so I could find out more about it. What was it? Han-sun asked again. We humans have the Extreme King's blood pulse gene. Although it is only a small smidgen of the stuff, it does exist. And that is how I was able to successfully pass myself off as one of the Extreme King without being discovered, Mr. White said. I guessed as much. Han-sun nodded. He had considered this possibility before. And if Mr. White had followed the same line of thought, there was no reason to believe he was incorrect. Mr. White continued to say, when the Extreme King become king class, they can awaken their king body. The king bodies are very similar to the super god bodies we have in the sanctuaries. There's one primary difference, however. Our super god bodies are independent, while their king bodies are not independent. What do you mean? Han-sun didn't understand. Mr. White groaned and went on to explain. What I mean to say is that our super god bodies are a part of us. Their king bodies seem to have a connection with the outside world, and some mysterious power. I am still investigating it. There are so many questions I have been unable to find answers for. I cannot explain everything. After chatting with Han-sun, Mr. White said, I should go. If you head left when you leave, you should soon come across Isha. Mr. White left, but Han-sun didn't go after Isha just yet. He walked over to the skeleton sitting in the command chair of the white whale. He took off the clothes that were on the skeleton, and then, he put the skeleton in a box. He planned on finding a good place to bury the man when he returned. It was a crystallizer. It was like someone of the same race. After thoroughly cleaning the pieces of clothing, Han-sun put them on. He put the transparent eye patch on his head, and he felt as if his thoughts were spreading. His body and his vision expanded. That feeling could not be explained. It was like the whale was becoming a part of his body. Waves of information rolled through eye patch, and were downloaded into his mind. To put it simply, Han-sun could now use his mind to control the white whale. Piloting the machine was as simple as using his own body. Han-sun guided the big white whale to the left, and there he found Isha. Isha was swimming through the sea. She saw the big whale and surged towards it. Han-sun quickly jumped out of it to prevent any misunderstandings. My queen, where is Fox Queen? Han-sun asked. Isha shook her head. She escaped. Then we should get out of here too. I got the item from Holy Town. Let's leave now. Han-sun then piloted the white whale out of the Holy Spirit Sea with Isha. When they reached the maze, Han-sun put away the whale. The enormous whale really was just like the beetle. It could shrink with its space technology. It shrank until it disappeared into the eye patch. It was like a little whale placed inside a bottle, and it looked magical. Chapter 2296 Can't Stop You. Isha and Han-sun returned to the base of the Ice Blue Knights, where they ran into Ice Blue Night King. It was fairly obvious that he had been unable to navigate the palace maze, and had thus decided to return. When he saw Isha and Han-sun come back together, Ice Blue Night King's eyes widened. Knife! I am so glad to learn that you are still alive, Ice Blue Night King said, coming up to her. I'm afraid that my survival might not be a good thing for you, Isha growled. Ice Blue Night King frowned. Isha, what makes you say that? I am alive. That means no one is allowed to bully my student. Do you understand now why that might not be a good thing? It would have been better for you if I had remained dead, Isha said, her voice as hard as stone. Ice Blue Night King fidgeted awkwardly, but he said, I was just doing my job. I had no choice in the matter. There were some things I just had to do. I don't care about your job. Let me ask you something. Did you drag my student into the Ice Blue Knights by force? Against his will? Isha stared at Ice Blue Night King as she spoke. Ice Blue Night King looked glum, and he admitted, yes. Were you the one who captured him? Isha asked. Yes, Ice Blue Night King said. If you were unable to look after him, why would you drag my student all the way out here? Is that how you manage the Ice Blue Knights? Isha hissed. Ice Blue Night King could not speak. His face turned red. Another Ice Blue Knight, who was accompanying Ice Blue Night King, stepped forward to angrily tell her off. Knife, don't be so rude. You are a member of the Ice Blue Knights yourself. How can you speak like that to your captain? From now on, I have no affiliation with the Ice Blue Knights. It's over. Isha looked at them all with disdain. Ice Blue Night King frowned and said, Knife, I understand the reasons for this mood of yours, but there are some things you can't just say. I will pretend I did not hear what you just said. If you want to talk, we can do so later and in private. There is nothing more for us to talk about. Let's go, Han Senior. Isha turned around to leave. Knife, don't be ridiculous. The Ice Blue Knights have rules. You are a member of the Ice Blue Knights, and you were born to be an Ice Blue Knight. Furthermore, you will one day die on behalf of the Ice Blue Knights. The Ice Blue Knights would never permit one of their members to turn traitor, and furthermore, the Extreme King would not allow. Ice Blue Night King trailed off, a shocked look crossing his face. Isha's body had filled with purple air. Like a demon, she covered the entirety of the Ice Blue Night base with her power. Suddenly, everyone in the base looked very pale. The weight of her suppression lay on them so heavily that they could barely stand. Deified. You became deified. Ice Blue Night King, and all the other Ice Blue Knights were stunned. I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating what you were telling me again? Isha turned an unyielding gaze on Ice Blue Night King, and the others. The King-class Ice Blue Knights had all turned pale. No one dared look Isha in the eyes now. Ice Blue Night King had also paled, and a series of emotions crossed his face, too quickly to recognize. He ultimately sighed, and said, I have my own reasons to want you to stay, but since you are already deified, I suppose the Ice Blue Knights don't stand a chance in keeping you here. In that case, I give you permission to leave. Isha did not look at Ice Blue Night King. She took Han Sun with her, and departed the Ice Blue Night base. My queen, that was awesome. Those Ice Blue Knights all looked so cocky, but they were ready to pee themselves before your glory, Han Sun told her as he piloted the white whale away from the base. After Isha and Han Sun departed the Ice Blue Knights, they used the big white whale to travel through space. They were headed back to Narrow Moon. Isha was holding Bauer. She fed Bauer pieces of fruit as she spoke. The 10 sets of Knights of the Extreme King. They all sound so powerful. They inspire fear across the Geno universe, spreading the belief that every knight has the power to destroy a race. But inside the Extreme King, the knights are still just pawns. They do the dirty work and little more. They aren't given important missions. If any of the members of the knights manage to become deified, they are permitted to leave. They are no longer bound to the knights. This is a rule of the Extreme Kings. Ice Blue Night King could not have fought against that. A powerful regiment of knights like the Ice Blue Knights are still only considered pawns. Han Sun was shocked to hear this. They don't have any deified members. If you think that is the primary army of the Extreme King, you are profoundly underestimating their might. Isha smiled, then went on to say, the primary army of the Extreme King is composed of the Royal Knights. They only recruit pure members of the Extreme King, however. And all entrants have to be at least King class. They have very high requirements when it comes to having the right blood and background. Aside from the Royal Knights, the Extreme King have many other organizations as well. Most of those are simply less famous. The Extreme King are so strong that very few races are able to compete with them. Even higher races like Sky Palace wouldn't stand a chance against the Extreme King in a fight. They rely on the power of the very high to make the Extreme King avoid them. That's the only reason that the Extreme King have never touched Sky Palace. I see. Han Sun did not understand how the Extreme King worked. He thought for a minute, then asked, then what is Narrow Moon to the Extreme King? We do not belong to anyone. Isha sighed and then said, I told you before. Our elder was a servant of Hell King at one point, but Hell King's time has long since passed. Now the ruler of the Extreme King is known as White King. Narrow Moon has never had a deified member before. But becoming deified would change little for rebate politics. A rebate would never be considered pure of race, and so they could never choose a side. They would be puppets. As long as my queen is here, the rebate will become one of the most famous high races in the entire universe. Han Sun was quick to lick her boots. Isha was his biggest supporter. The safety and security of Han's son and his friends and family all depended on Isha. Isha rolled her eyes. Tell me what happened in Narrow Moon. Han's son told her about everything that had transpired in Narrow Moon. He did not exaggerate anything, but even so, Isha's face darkened after hearing it all. They divided up all of my possessions? They were cruel to my one and only student? They are all such rotten bullies. Hansen's heart felt touched. If she was saying things like that, then that meant he really was quite important to her. It is okay that they bullied my student, but they stole my palace and dirted up all my things. I cannot allow this, Isha said angrily. Han's son was touched before, but now he was speechless. He rubbed his nose and said, Yeah, you cannot allow that. You are going to have to teach them all a lesson. Chapter 2297. The only queen as the white whale left the ice blue system. Han's son guided it towards where Night River King had been stationed. He was unable to find anything out of the ordinary there, however, and he couldn't find a single trace of that weird purple stuff that Night River King had mentioned repeatedly. Han's son even went to see the ice blue knight, who had taken over Night River King's position, but the knight hadn't seen anything strange during his time stationed there. Weird. What was that purple thing Night River King was talking about? What about the journal entries he made in code? Han's son didn't understand, but he didn't plan on lingering in the system to figure it out, either. Han's son turned the white whale out of the system, plotting a course back to Narrow Moon. He didn't see Under Overbearing again, and neither did he see the black hole spider. They did encounter many more of those galactic shrimp. The attacks of the shrimp were unable to penetrate the defenses of the white whale, though. And added to that, none of the creatures were as fast as the white whale. Having a powerful ship like the white whale ensured their safety as they traveled, assuming that they only ran into ordinary xenogeneics like the galactic shrimp. If they got into trouble, it would be because they bumped into a creature like Under Overbearing or the black hole spider. Of course, even if that happened, they had the deified elite Isha on board. They had good luck in their travels. Isha and Han's son were able to depart the systems of chaos with absolute safety. They would soon be back in Narrow Moon. Dude, what happened? Why has every noble across every planet been ordered to go to Full Moon Hall? Haven't you heard? Knife Queen is back. Knife Queen is back? How is that possible? I thought she died in the systems of chaos. That's what all the nobles thought too. That's why they plundered her legacy inventory without fear. But she has really come back. And not just that, she's come back deified. What? Queen has become deified? This is awesome. We rebate finally have a deified elite in our ranks. Who would dare underestimate us now? Queen is way too powerful. Teehee. It might be good for us, but what about the nobles who divided up her things? They stole her legacy and crushed her student Han's son under their feet. Now that she has come back deified, they must be shivering in their boots. They had it coming. They think they're so high and mighty, bullying a student. I'm happy that those nobles are going to get told off. They always bully us, don't they? And we can never fight back. Now that they are in trouble, well, it's what they deserve. As Narrow Moon's people were discussing Knife Queen's return, a serious discussion was being held in Full Moon Hall. No, absolutely not. Miss Knife. Han's son is just an outsider. He does not have what it takes to be our holy child, an elder said, shaking his head forcefully. Flower King said, Knife. Miss, don't you think that this is a little inappropriate? The holy child has always been the best and most promising of the rebate. Han's son isn't even one of our kind. Even if we force him to become our holy child, the rest of our citizens will vehemently object to the selection. Miss Knife, please think about this. Black Moon King liked Han's son, but even he did not think that this was right. They risked angering their entire race. All the nobles were arguing against Isha's decision to elect Han's son as the holy child. Full Moon Hall was filled with so many shouting voices that it was louder than a supermarket. Moon Will King raised his hand to tell everyone to quiet down. Then he looked at Isha and said, Knife, we were not considerate to you and Han's son in your absence. We can give him whatever he deserves, but the position of holy child is something of gross importance. It affects the very legacy and glory of our race. Allowing an outsider to take this position is in no way appropriate. You must think about this decision some more. Are you guys done? Isha sat at the head of the conference table. She coldly looked upon all of the nobles that had gathered there. All of those nobles felt a massive chill as her eyes came to stare at each of them in turn. They fell utterly silent under the weight of her gaze. The same was true for Flower King, as it was all the others. After everyone stopped talking, Isha spoke in a slow, deliberate voice. What if I insist that Han's son becomes our holy child? Knife Queen, if you insist, then you'll have to forgive us for being unreasonable. The elders will never agree to this notion, and I am sure none of the kings here in Full Moon Hall agree to it either. The members of the Council of Elders kept trying to convince her. Knife Queen, we are objecting to your plan in order to preserve the legacy and glory of the rebate. We cannot allow everything we have built for the rebate to be destroyed. Are you saying I am destroying the rebate as a whole? Isha asked coldly. Knife Queen, that is not what we meant. The elder wanted to say more, but Isha cut him off. Isha swept her gaze across the nobles and stopped at Moonwheel King. I called you all here to tell you of the decision I have made. I did not call you here for you to voice your opinions on the matter. Starting from today, Han's son is the holy child of the rebate. If you have a problem with the decision, let me hear it now. Many of the nobles were frozen. Although they objected, no one wished to square off against Isha. They all looked at Moonwheel King. Moonwheel King frowned and looked at Isha. What if we all object at once? Isha laughed. She stood up, ignoring Moonwheel King. She looked down upon all of the nobles and slowly said, Listen up, people. From now on, Narrow Moon is my narrow moon. The rebate have only one queen. Whoever follows me will live, but anyone who seeks to betray me will die. You can object, but if you directly disobey one of my commands, I will consider you an enemy. I do not mind an injection of fresh blood to fill up the ranks of Narrow Moon. Over the next few months, political instability swept through the rebate. The people in power kept changing, and families rose and fell on a daily basis. Hansun really admired Isha's decisiveness. Once she made her mind up, she took sole control of rebate society without looking back. She'd lacked the strength to make such a bold power grab before. But now that she was deified, she could suppress anyone who rose against her. She ruled single-handedly, which allowed complicated issues to get resolved much faster. But other problems began to appear. There were many different factions within rebate society, and no one could say for certain if Isha would be able to unite the fragmented society while maintaining her dictatorship. Some issues could not be solved through power alone. Claiming the throne had been Isha's first step, but there was a long road ahead of her. Han Sun was confident in Isha, but he honestly didn't pay much attention to the political turmoil of the rebate. He was busy investigating the information given to him by Mr. White. The techniques of the Xianmen were very deep. There was a great deal of information to sift through, which included more than just a few genoarts. Some of what Han Sun read would take a few hundred years to truly comprehend. Chapter 2298 Deified Speed. There were many things that couldn't be truly understood by merely reading a book. Instead, they had to be figured out by each individual. The teachings of the Xianmen were this sort of knowledge. Han Sun planned to find a few people that could research the Xianmen information on his behalf and determine what content might be suitable for humans to learn. He also wanted to establish a special school in the Alliance that would teach the Xianmen techniques to other humans. He wanted to pass on the knowledge and expand the lineage of the Xianmen. It was just as Mr. White had said. If 1 or 2 people in every 10 million were able to follow the righteous path of Xianmen, then that would be enough. Surprisingly, Ji Yanran expressed an interest in the subject. Han Sun quickly turned the project over to her. But Ji Yanran didn't do as Han Sun hoped. Instead of building a school for the purpose of teaching the Xianmen philosophy, she opened up a martial hall. In it, she would start by teaching the Xianmen martial arts, whereas the philosophies of the Xianmen way would be taught at a later time. No one will treasure something that is earned very easily, and the Xianmen way of thinking is not suitable for everyone. It requires too much heart. By teaching them this way, the philosophies are likely to be accepted by more people, Ji Yanran explained. Ji Yanran's line of thinking made sense to Han Senator, He had only learned the secret techniques of the Xian Men anyway. He didn't actually understand the core concepts of the Xian Men way himself. Potential students would have absolutely no experience with the Xian Men techniques going in, so it would likely be a waste of time for them to learn. Not many people would ever be able to understand this stuff. If we can't even start a school, do you really think your martial hall will work? Han Sen asked, purely to be contrary. Ji Yanran laughed. This will be easy. We only need your big face for an advertisement, and our doors will be swarmed with upper-class socialites begging to sign up. They only need to hear that these techniques were practiced by the great Han Senator. I wager they'd fight to the death and use any trick in the book to get their kids accepted into our martial hall. Mr. White's intention was to see the Xian Men expanded. If you approach things like this, you are only serving the needs of the upper class. Han Sen frowned. Ji Yanran laughed and said, Don't worry. Over the years, most ideas start with high society. Once an idea has been accepted by the wealthy and powerful, it is more easily disseminated to the lower class. This is especially true when it comes to the ideals of the Xian Men. In ancient times, famous philosophers and scholars would embark on lengthy journeys to convince people of all different societal levels of their ideals. Now we just need time and advertisements. Honey, don't work yourself to the bone. You should bring on some added help. Han Sen could not be bothered to help her himself, of course. If she was willing to shoulder the responsibility, then that was fine with him. The box Han Sen had taken from Holy Town was locked, so he couldn't open it. He had tried to pry it open in many different ways, but nothing worked. Even Isha's power had been insufficient to break the jade stone box. Because Han Sen hadn't been able to find out what was inside, he put the box away for the moment. Instead, he turned his attention to the bone needle. It was the one Han Sen took from the palace maze. There were 12 drops of deified blood still inside it. They represented 12 different deified blood pulses. Han Sen did not use them. First, he wanted to research them. Because Han Sen's body still contained more ghost bone power than he could use, he currently had no need for the energy that the deified blood pulses offered. He pondered the blood pulses for a while, and he eventually decided to have a drop anyway. Han Sen chose to consume the drop he had retrieved from the blood demon. It was of the blood element. He wanted to see if it might help his blood pulse sutra. Han Sen lifted the bone needle above his chest, and then he thrust it into his heart. This was not an intravenous injection like one would receive from an ordinary doctor. If a normal person tried this as Han Sen did, they would most definitely die. Do not try this at home. The bone needle pierced right through his heart, and a drop of deified blood spilled into him. Han Sen was about to begin refining the deified blood when he suddenly heard an announcement play in his head. Successful infusion of deified gene. Deified gene +1. Deified progress is 1 out of 100. After that announcement, Han Sen felt a scary power explode in his heart and sweep into every corner of his body. His cells shuddered as the new power surged through him, and he began to change. His body felt like he was shedding, sloughing off layer upon layer of old cells. This entire process lasted a whole day before coming to an end. Trails of a black substance littered the floor, like the flaky remains of a dead snake. It looked quite scary. Han Sen, Super God Spirit Body Gene Battle Body, Mutant Blood Duke, Spell Marquise, Dongxian Marquise, Jade Skin Duke, Level. Duke Genes, 17 Deified Progress, 1/100 Lifespan. 1100 Han Sen was shocked. He did not know what deified progress meant. Are deified genes different from the genes that come before? What does deified progress mean? Does this mean I will be deified once the number reaches 100? I can achieve deified status without maxing out any other genes? Han Sen could not figure out what was going on. Han Sen studied himself after receiving his one deified gene. His body had changed. It was like his genes had all improved. What hadn't improved, though, was his fitness. It was still at the level of a duke. Han Sen tried to refine another deified drop of blood. The process was exactly the same. Han Sen's body changed again, and he received an additional deified gene point. His deified progress became 2 of 100. His fitness did not increase much, but if he was able to earn deified genes, that meant it was a power that humans could accept. That relaxed many of Han Sen's worries, and he absorbed the rest of the deified blood. Over the next 2 weeks, Han Sen refined his deified blood. His deified progress became 12 of 100, and after the refining process, his fitness increased by quite a bit. But strangely, Han Sen didn't gain any special blood pulse powers after receiving the deified blood pulses. Where can I get more deified genes? Once I reach 100, I guess I'll be able to find out what it does, Han Sen thought to himself. It would be too difficult to kill deified beings by himself though. At his current strength, it was an impossible task. It's a shame that the little red bird ate my son Raven. If it hadn't, I could have given it a try. Perhaps I could eat the flesh of deified creatures, Han Sen thought to himself. Thinking about the little red bird, Han Sen checked on the egg inside the bird's nest again. Han Sen was shocked. A number of weird substance chains had appeared from the nest and were drilling into the red egg. The red color of the egg was shining brightly, as if it was being consumed by a red fire. Chapter 2299 The Little Red Bird Hatches. Is the little red bird about to hatch? Han Sen thought in surprise. But as he watched, the color gradually drained from Han Sen's face. The substance chains connected to the bird's nest started to pull back into the egg, and the nest began to fall apart piece by piece. Pieces of dry grass fell away from the nest, turning to dust in midair. Before they reached the ground, they had dissolved into nothing. Oh no! Is this little guy going to drain all the power out of the nest? Han Sen reached out to save the nest, but when his hand touched the red flame, his body aged and withered. Within a second, he was so old that he looked to be on the verge of death. Han Sen jerked his hand back. When his hand was no longer close to the red flame, his body returned to normal. He didn't look old anymore. The sight of the disintegrating bird's nest made Han Sen's heart bleed. And there was another reason that this was a very serious problem. Queen Bai Wei had told him to hold on to the bird's nest. What if Queen Bai Wei returned for the missing nest? What would he do then? That line of thinking was pointless, however. The egg had already absorbed most of the nest's power. The dry grass had turned into dust, and there was nothing he could do to reverse the process. The egg's red flame burned hotter and hotter, and the egg itself became thinner and more transparent. As the egg became translucent, he could see what was inside it. The little red bird was still curled inside the egg, sleeping peacefully. Its body was full of fire, and it looked as if it was awaking from its slumber. When eggshell became paper thin, it finally cracked. The shell crumbled into nothing, burning away in the fire. The little red bird fell out. It opened its wings, and flames roared out of its body. It became a red phoenix. It immediately flew around in the air. It circled Han Sen 3 times, nodded at him repeatedly, then flew down to settle on his shoulder. That movement shocked Han Sen. The fire on its body was not an ordinary fire. Han Sen had only just touched it, and he had almost died of old age. He worried that if the bird landed on him now, he'd grow so old that he'd crumble into dust himself. Han Sen tensed as the little red bird landed. Its fire was gone at least. It now really did look just like a little red bird. It landed on Han Sen's shoulder in exactly the same way that it used to. Han Sen sighed. Fortunately, the little red bird had some modicum of intelligence. If it hadn't restrained its power, things might have turned out poorly for him. Little Red. Bauer came waddling in from the outside. She sounded so happy when she saw the little red bird. The little red bird was sitting quietly on Han Sen's shoulder, but when it heard Bauer, it perked up immediately. It flew towards Bauer's hand and allowed Bauer to stroke its feathers. The bird looked as if it enjoyed the attention, and it kept its head there for Bauer to stroke. What is this? I am your master, you know. Han Sen lifted his lip. He looked at the little red bird with an unfriendly smile. The little red bird seemed to acknowledge Han Sen's expression, so it flapped its wings and flew quickly behind Bauer. It peeked at Han Sen by poking its head over Bauer's shoulder. This guy ate the flesh of the sun raven. It should be deified no matter what. Why is the guy still so small? Han Sen was confused, but the power within the little red bird was proof of its rank. Not even Han Sen could withstand its fire for a single second. It was definitely a deified creature. Those days Han Sen felt good. After Isha made him the rebate's holy child, He received a lot of resources. Planet Eclipse remained under his control, and he was given another 8 planets, and a slew of different treasures as well. Even more resources would come Han Sen's way in the future, but he had too much of that ghost bone power still within him. He didn't need any more resources right now, so for the moment, he planned to put everything he received in storage. Han Sen had brought many spirits to Planet Eclipse, and they left the planet to explore the Geno universe when they became marquises. Six Paths King, Mingyu, and Moment Queen had already begun their journeys. Han Sen didn't worry about the safety of Six Paths King, and Mingyu left with Gu Qingcheng. Han Sen wanted Moment Queen to stay by his side, but she refused. She wanted to level up alone. Han Sen didn't force her to stay. Moment Queen had been with him for quite some time. In their early days together, Han Sen came to her as a threat, but eventually after much time, he won her over. They had enough trust in each other that he was comfortable bringing her to the Geno universe. Things had been going well for Han Sen lately, but it couldn't last. Life soon proved that there was always something for Han Sen to worry about. He received word that an envoy of the Extreme King would be coming to visit Narrow Moon. This time, the leader of the envoy would be the 14th Prince Bai Songlong. When he heard the name, Han Sen's worry deepened. Crime had served Prince 14. The Extreme King delegation claimed that they were visiting to congratulate Isha on her ascension to becoming deified. But such a simple courtesy wouldn't usually require Prince 14's personal attendance. Amongst a smaller race like the Rebate, a deified warrior was practically a god. For the Extreme King, though, achieving deified status just made someone exceptional. They wouldn't send a delegation all this way just to congratulate Isha on an achievement that many of their own members had made. When Han Sen learned that Bai Wei was a part of the envoy, he knew that Mr. White had been correct. He would be forced to go with the Extreme King. If Mr. White's guess is correct, going with the Extreme King will be very dangerous for me. Zero and Menger shouldn't go, because I might not be able to protect them from the Extreme King. They should stay in Narrow Moon under Isha's protection. They will be treated well, and now that I have resources, they should become dukes without too much difficulty. It might even be possible for them to make it to king rank. I have to take the blood Kirin though. Its power can surely help. But should I bring the little red bird? Han Sen was hesitating. Han Sen was deep in thought, but he looked up suddenly, turning his face toward the entrance of the garden. There, he saw a blue-clothed man leading a lady in white into his garden. The woman in white was Queen Bai Wei. Han Sen didn't know who the blue-clothed man was, but judging from the way he walked, Han Sen could guess that the man was Prince 14 Bai Songlong. Han Sen wasn't surprised that they had come looking for him, but he was surprised that no one had warned him before the two showed up in his garden. Normally, someone should have reported their arrival. Even if they forced their way in, someone should still have gotten a message to Han Senator, but Han Sen had received no warnings. Business in the base continued as usual. Bai Songlong brought Bai Wei right into the deepest part of the garden. Han Sen frowned and examined Bai Songlong. He looked like a man in his 30s. He was not pretty, but he had a noticeable air of casual strength about him. He walked as if he had no cares in the world. He looked so free. Although he was walking through Han Sen's garden, Bai Songlong behaved as if he was at home. He walked up to Han Sen and sat down next to him. He picked up the teapot and teacup upon the stone table, and poured himself a cup of tea. He said, "This tea is fine, and the people here are great." Chapter 2300 Recruit. This cup of tea, for a part of a duke's xenogenic gene. I appreciate the exchange, Han Sen said politely. Bai Songlong looked surprised. Then he smiled and said, Good, good, good. I like greedy people. After that, Bai Songlong's smile disappeared. He looked at Han Sen seriously and said, I want you. How much are you worth? 100 king-class xenogenic genes, Han Sen said. Good. That is far cheaper than I expected. You are certainly worth the price, Bai Songlong answered without hesitation. He nodded vigorously. For 1 year, Han Sen finished. Bai Songlong looked at Han Sen with shock. 100 king-class xenogenic genes was not a high price for Prince 14 of the Extreme King. But 100 king-class xenogenic genes, For a measly year of service from a duke? That was something that had never happened before. For that price, Prince 14 could have bought a lifetime of service from 12 dukes. How much will it cost to buy you permanently? Bai Songlong asked. His voice was curious, but not angry. 100 king-class xenogenic genes, for a year is a fixed price. I offer no sales or bulk rates here. You buy each year, for as long as you want me, Han Sun said with sincerity. Bai Songlong laughed. He pulled out a tablet and set it down on the table. He said, I will use this to purchase your services for 100 years. I am leaving tomorrow. It is your decision whether or not you will choose to accompany us. After that, Bai Songlong stood up and left. He did not look back. Han Sun looked at the tablet on the table. It was a green jade tablet that was around the size of a man's hand. Both sides bore depictions of dragons, and they each looked as if they were clutching a ball between their claws. On both sides of the tablet, the name Songlong was written. This is Brother 14's Royal Guard tablet. You need to be at least king class to be considered one of his royal guard. Bai Wei explained. Although Prince 14 had left, she was still standing there, staring at Han Sr. I am just a minor duke. I'm not worth Prince 14 bending the rules for, I assure you, Han Sun said, while playing with the tablet. Brother 14 came here to recruit your teacher Knife Queen, but she refused. He is now going for the second best option, which is you. He wants you because you are her student. Bai Wei paused and then went on to say, It seems like you have made him angry. There is nothing I can do about that. I won't agree to a deal just because someone is having a hissy fit. Han Sun shrugged. Bai Wei suddenly reached her hand out to Han Sr. Give it to me. What? Han Sun asked, pretending to be surprised. Don't give me that. Hand over the undying bird nest. Bai Wei grunted. You can't take it away. Why should I give it back? Han Sun felt sick. The bird's nest had been destroyed by the little red bird, so there was nothing to return. Whether I take it or leave it is my decision, and I'm telling you to give it back. Bai Wei's voice was cold. I would like to return it, but the item broke the last time I used it. Han Sun opened his hands with the confession, looking apologetic. Han Sun didn't think he could hide the fact that the bird's nest was gone, so he had no choice but to admit the truth. When Bai Wei heard his apology, she laughed. She smiled at him and said, I'd expect a better excuse from a thief. You know, the Bai family is not one you can so easily shrug off and ignore. Bai Wei didn't believe for a second that the undying bird nest, which was a deified item, had been broken. Not even a deified elite could break it. It is true. I'm not lying. Han Sun looked at her very earnestly, forcing an innocent expression onto his face. Bai Wei sneered and rolled her eyes. She wasn't happy to hear about this. Fine. If you do not want to return it, pay back your debt by being my royal guard. Bai Wei poured herself a cup of tea, as if she was some sort of repo woman. 10 years. Han Sun gritted his teeth, as if he had just made a big decision. Bai Wei smiled clearly. She had a sip of tea before saying flatly, Serving me is just a way of paying interest on the loan. When you return the undying bird nest, then you can go. I will do nothing to stop you. How does that work? Han Sun blinked. Bai Wei smiled. Give me the undying bird nest or be my royal guard. The choice is yours to make. I do not like forcing people into doing something they do not wish to do. He couldn't refuse both options. The nest was gone. But if he refused to go with them, he'd be forced to fight them. That was also beyond his abilities. Bai Wei sighed and said, Actually, you have no choice. Brother 14 won't give up easily. I bet that if you don't become my royal guard, he will do everything he can to bring you in close to him. His purpose, ultimately, is your teacher Knife Queen mind. You will be used as a pawn or a tool to get to her. After pausing, Bai Wei went on to say, At least my desire for your service is genuine. I really just want you and not your teacher. It looks like I have no alternatives here. Han Sun gave Bai Wei the tablet. Help me return this to Prince 14 then. Bai Wei wanted him, and Bai Songlong was incredibly annoying. Han Sun would opt for Bai Wei if it meant he didn't have to deal with the irritating prince. Bai Wei took the tablet, then glanced around the garden. Where are your sister and daughter? They can come too. I do not mind bringing on more people. Although they cannot be royal guards, I can promise you that they will be treated well. They say thank you, but no thank you, Han Sun answered immediately, turning down Bai Wei's offer. The Extreme King trip would be a dangerous voyage. It was a good opportunity, but Han Sun didn't want to expose Han Menger and the others to unnecessary risks. He was only going to bring Bauer, the Blood Kirin, and the little red bird. Bai Wei did not say anything. She pulled a tablet out of her pocket and gave it to Han's senator. It was a white tablet adorned with flowers the color of blood. The name Wei was written across it in a simple script. The tablet was a little plain, but strikingly delicate too. Han Sun knew that it was Bai Wei's Royal Guard tablet. He took it and twirled it through his fingers. What does the Royal Guard of a queen need to do, exactly? I won't be entertaining you everywhere we go or taking care of your day-to-day needs, will I? Bai Wei rubbed her nose and said, You think that members of the royal family spend their days lazing around? There are many members of the Extreme King royal family. If we want resources, we have to fight for them ourselves. Otherwise, even a royal could end up worse than an Extreme King noble. Are things really that competitive? Han Sun asked skeptically. Bai Wei said, Father believes in survival of the fittest. That is what he taught us when we were young. We receive basically the same treatment as the other Extreme King nobles. We might have a few extra resources but not much. If we want more, we need to prove ourselves worthy of it. If you do not work hard, you will end up worse than a commoner. It's challenging, but we are fairly rewarded for our efforts. You will get a share of everything that you earn under my employ. How much you gain just depends on how much you are willing to help. Chapter 23:01 The Grave of Soldiers and Kings. Han Sun went to meet with Isha. He told her about the agreement he had made with Bai Wei. When Isha heard the details, she said, It is good that you are going with the Extreme King. If you stayed in Narrow Moon, it is unlikely that you would find enough resources to reach King class. Although I am the ruling queen of Narrow Moon, I cannot plunder all of its resources for the sole purpose of making you a king. You will eventually have to blaze your own trail. And going with the Extreme King isn't a bad way to start down that path. After that, Isha looked at Han Sun and said, I thought you would have chosen to follow Prince 14. I didn't expect you to go for Queen Bai Wei. Did you choose her because of her appearance? That is very funny, my queen. Han Sun felt a chill run down his spine, and so he tried to explain. Prince 14 wants to use me as a tool to get to you. There is no way I would allow that to happen. Isha nodded and said, Prince 14 did want me, that is right. But Prince 14 has much more powerful backers than Queen Bai Wei. You would earn far more resources by following him. Choosing to follow Bai Wei is a pretty bad decision. Is Bai Songlong that much more important? Han Sun hadn't contemplated this possibility. His mother is of the dragon. Therefore, he has the support of both the dragon and the Extreme King, and he can exploit both of their resources. Queen Bai Wei is just the daughter of a servant in the Extreme King, and that servant is now dead. Compared to most of the Extreme King royals, Bai Wei's base of support is very weak. After pausing, Isha continued to say, But because of that, her desperation and self-sufficiency may give you other opportunities. There is good and bad. Following her might not be too bad of a decision. Han Sun agreed. He didn't plan on being with the Extreme King forever though. All he wanted was to gain some more resources. Even if Bai Wei wasn't the best connected of the royalty, she was still a queen. She had a far better opportunity to gain resources than any commoner did. That was for sure. She just needed to earn those resources for herself. Han Sun packed his stuff and left with Bai Wei. During the journey, he spent a lot of his time refining his stores of ghost bone power to strengthen the story of genes. The story of genes kept growing stronger, but it would still be a while before it reached Duke class. Even once he refined all of the ghost bone power, Han Sun wasn't sure it would be enough to make him a duke. When Bai Songlong saw Han Sun board a battleship with Bai Wei, the prince stopped paying attention to him. Bai Songlong wanted Han Sun because of his affiliation with Isha. He wasn't that interested in Han Sun himself. A duke wasn't worth very much if he didn't have connections with more powerful people. Han Sun had rejected his invitation too. That had upset Bai Songlong, but the prince wouldn't hold it against him. At first, Han Sen thought that Bai Songlong had let the matter drop out of respect for Bai Wei, but that wasn't the real reason. In truth, Bai Songlong still desired Isha. Since he would have to try other methods to recruit Isha, he didn't plan on bringing Han Sen any harm for now. To Bai Songlong, Han Sen had made a hilarious mistake by joining Bai Wei. He figured it would not be long before Han Sen expressed regret in his decision. "You only brought her?" Bai Wei asked in surprise when she saw Han Sen's young daughter. The Extreme King wasn't an easy place for children. Instead of bringing the powerful Han Ming'er, Han Sen was being accompanied by a small infant. It was enough to make Bai Wei frown. "My daughter and I are very close. Without me she cannot fall asleep." Han Sen smiled and did not explain much. The Extreme King's main xenogenic space was known as the King's Kingdom. The system was very big. It was almost as big as the systems of chaos. Bai Wei was a royal, but she did not live in a palace. Bai King wanted his royal family to be independent, so they were given a small planet in the King's Kingdom as their starting point. Bai Wei's planet was called Planet Wind Zone. Once Han Sen reached the planet, he quickly understood why Bai Wei was having such a hard time amongst the Extreme King. Planet Wind Zone's environment was terrible, and there were very few resources available. It seemed as if Bai Wei was getting the shaft on her starter planet. No member of the royal family should have ended up on such a barren planet. After bringing Han Sen to the living quarters, Bai Wei turned to address him seriously. "Now you see the squalor of my condition. I was going to finish the mission assigned to me by my father and bring back the undying bird nest. If I did that, I'd have been given a planet with many resources. But now I have nothing. So we have no time to relax. Settle in, but be ready to start working tomorrow." Bai Wei was living in a castle. The castle was in the center of a city, but the city looked very poor. It made Han Sen frown. The servants and the knights in the castle were of a low caste. It was obvious that Bai Wei was having a very hard time living there. "My queen, do you have any enemies in your race?" Han Sen could not help but ask. Bai Wei's face did not change. "I am a royal, but my mother was a mere servant. There was never a way I could become a proper leader or anything. As long as I don't challenge others for stuff, I won't get bothered. But Princess Ten and her mother are different." Han Sen listened attentively, but it didn't seem like Bai Wei wanted to talk about it. She just told Han Sen to rest, then she left. But even though she hadn't explained much, Han Sen could make some guesses. He had heard stories about infighting in the royal family. But the internal politics of the Extreme King didn't matter to Han Senator. He was only concerned with how he could earn resources from the Extreme King. Quickly, Han Sen realized that the Extreme King had resources everywhere. They were far wealthier than Sky Palace, but the resources here had to be fought for. Of course, ordinary people couldn't lay claim to items of such value. But Bai Wei was a royal, so there was a chance for her to claim resources. The next morning, Han Sen was called to the meeting hall by Bai Wei. There, they discussed how they might enter the grave of soldiers and kings. The grave of soldiers and kings wasn't really a grave. It was an armory. The weapons there had been used by an assortment of different kings. Of course, the grave not only held the deified weapons that the kings had used at the end of their lives, it also included the weaker weapons that they had used in their youth. The royal children were able to enter the grave of soldiers and kings, and if they were lucky, they could earn the approval of some of the weapons. They could then take the weapons out of the grave and use the weapons as their own. Chapter 2302 by Wuchang. Out of all the royal children, it was rare for someone like Bai Wei, especially at her age, to not have visited the grave of soldiers and kings. This wasn't a negative commentary on Bai Wei's skill, however. If she went to the grave of soldiers and kings alone, she would have to be at least king class to pass the test. The test in the grave of soldiers and kings allowed the help of royal guards. Bai King had created a few of the tests to focus on the personal power of the royal children, but most of the tests focused on the collective power of the team. To become an emperor, a person could not rely solely on their own power. Emperors needed the skill and authority to control others effectively. The strongest ally that Bai Wei had was her butler. There were some other marquis and earl servants and knights in her employ, But Han Sun was her only official royal guard. Bai Wei was having a bad time, because Planet Wind Zone did not have enough resources to support the development of high-level knights. No one remotely powerful would follow a lowly royal like her. On top of all that, Bai Wei wasn't held in high esteem by the common people. Because of that, the people who were willing to follow her weren't particularly outstanding. The grave of soldiers and kings allowed a royal to bring 10 royal guards with them, but the guards had to be ranked duke or lower. Han Sen's plan to bring the blood Kirin was shot down immediately. So, that means the only people that are useful here are you, me, and the butler. Han Sun frowned. Bai Wei shook her head. Just you and me, actually. Not the butler. The butler isn't a royal guard, so he isn't qualified to enter the grave of soldiers and kings. Han Sun gave her a wry smile. You are using me as a stand-in for all 10 royal guards? I should take the combined cut you'd give all 10 then. If we can get into the grave of soldiers and kings, I will go half and half on the spoils with you, Bai Wei said. The grave of soldiers and kings contains the weaponry of kings. Only one of the royals can take the stuff. How are we supposed to split what we find? Han Sun asked. Bai Wei laughed. Of course you cannot take a king's weapon, but the grave contains more than just royal weapons. Otherwise, the princes and princesses would have taken it all away already. Many weapons have been left there simply to honor the dead. They are rare treasures, and royal guards are each allowed to take one of them. That way, you and I will both be able to take something. Upon hearing that he could gain something from this venture, Han Sun felt much better. Bai Wei went on to say, plus, the grave of soldiers and kings has more to offer than simply weapons. Passing through the grave of soldiers and kings will qualify me to study in the king's garden. That is the true benefit I seek. Royal guards can follow me there to study, so that should be something that interests you as well. Although Han Sun had only just come to the Extreme King, he had heard about the king's garden before. There was a deified king tree there, and it was native to the king's kingdom. In the daytime, the king tree released king air. Absorbing the king air could strengthen your body and genes. It was very helpful for nobles who wanted to level up. But the king tree only released a limited amount of king air. Even royals were required to pass certain tests before they could enter the king's garden and obtain some of the king air. Access to the grave of soldiers and kings was one of the requirements for entry. There were many other conditions, but Bai Wei had already met them. Passing through the grave of soldiers and kings was the only challenge that Bai Wei been unsuccessful in completing. Han Sun didn't know what the test inside the grave would be like. He couldn't promise Bai Wei that he could lead her through it successfully, so he planned on just having a look first. However, both Bai Wei and Han Sun were Duke class. She was confident in being able to enter the grave of soldiers and kings. Han Sun left Bauer, the blood Kirin, and the little red bird behind on Planet Wind area. Then, Han Sun and Bai Wei journeyed to the grave. The grave of soldiers and kings was a planet. Han Sun and Bai Wei reached a space station in orbit above the planet, and Bai Wei completed the documentation, while Han Sun waited in the lobby. This poor queen. She has to do everything by herself. Han Sun sighed. He closed his eyes and tried to get a little rest. But he suddenly felt someone approach. Many people were coming and going from the lobby, but that person's presence caught Han Sun's attention. He opened his eyes. It was a 20-year-old man with an ordinary extreme king face. His eyes were very stable. His whole body was like a knife that could be pulled out of a scabbard. The man walked straight up to Han Senator. He stopped in front of Han Sun, his gaze direct. You are Han Sun? I am. What is your name? Han Sun asked warily. He had only just come to the Extreme King, but already someone was looking for him. Bai Wuchang, the young man answered seriously. Hearing that name, Han Sun was surprised. He thought, this name is a bomb. I wonder what genius decided to give his son such an awesome name. Are they not afraid their son might die? Bai Wuchang ignored Han Sun's hesitation. Are you the Han Sun that is affiliated with Lone Bamboo? The one with the title of Knife and Sword Master? I am that Han Sun, but that title is just a name people use to make fun of me. You cannot take it seriously, Han Sun said. Bai Wuchang nodded. That's fine as long as you are the one. I wanted to fight Lone Bamboo, but I've never gotten the chance. Since you are here, I will fight you first. Bai Wuchang pulled a card out of his pocket and gave it to Han Sr. Take this card. I will wait for you inside tomorrow night. After that, Bai Wuchang didn't wait for Han's son to give a response. He simply left. What is this? I did not even give him an answer. Han's son wanted to call after Bai Wuchang, but as he stepped forward, he realized that the man was already gone. He had walked out of the lobby and left the space station. Who was that guy? Han's son looked at the card in his hand, assuming that it was a calling card. It was a black card with white text that simply read, Bai Wuchang. There was nothing else. It said nothing about Bai Wuchang's position amongst the Extreme King. Han's son looked at the card in his hands. Bai Wei walked toward him, having finished her paperwork, but her eyes widened when she saw the card. Where did you get that? There was this guy called Bai Wuchang. He approached and gave me this card. And then he left, Han's son said while holding the card. Bai Wei looked glum. She quickly asked, Is he going to challenge you? I think so, Han's son said with a nod. This is bad. How did he learn that you are here? And on top of that, he has the audacity to come and challenge you? He must be part of someone else's plan, Bai Wei said while nibbling her lips. Who is this Bai Wuchang? Is he famous? Han's son asked casually. Bai Wei sighed and said, He is my brother, and he is a prince. And he is the son of the empress. But unlike most princes, he has little in the way of authority. He only wants to level up. Even father says he is one of our most talented princes. It is hard to predict how he will grow in the coming years. Chapter 230318 hits. Bai Wuchang has a strange personality. So father never planned on letting him succeed to the throne. He still loves him dearly, of course. Bai Wuchang is the only one who has never recruited guards for fighting. But father still provides him resources in order to level up, Bai Wei said. He takes care of him that much? Won't the other sons and daughter get jealous? Han's son asked with shock. They are more than just jealous, but none of them can do anything about it. Father is indeed biased toward Bai Wuchang, and he is the son of the empress. The crown prince is his big brother from the same parents. Even though he was just a student of a national teacher, others have to think very carefully before risking a fight with him, Bai Wei said. Who is the national teacher? Han's son did not know much about the internal workings of Extreme King society. His name is Gu Yuan. When Bai Wei said the name, she lowered her voice. It looked as if talking about him made her uncomfortable. You'll hear more about him later. Anyway, just don't accept Bai Wuchang's challenge no matter what you do, Bai Wei said. I didn't plan on fighting him anyway. Han's son shrugged and laughed. There was no way he was going to accept a challenge that had been presented to him in that fashion. It would just be a waste of time. Bai Wei sighed and said, That's good. I finished all the paperwork, so let's go. As they left the space station and headed down towards the grave of soldiers and kings, a woman sat in the control room, watching Han's son and Bai Wei through a camera feed. The woman was extremely pretty. Just seeing her sitting there was enough to bring people a feeling of happiness. She might not have been as beautiful as women like Fox Queen, but she looked so cold and so smart. It was impressive. It was like everything in the world was reflected in her lake-like eyes. The space station's captain stood next to the woman. He leaned over her and said in a flirty voice, Miss Mirror, you can tell me anything. I will do whatever it is you wish. I just want to stay here quietly. Can I, Captain? The woman answered with a smile. Of course, of course. What are you guys waiting for? Get out. Hurry, hurry. Move faster. The captain quickly kicked out every worker that was present in the control room. Miss Mirror, is there anything else? After the captain kicked out all the workers, he stood in front of the woman, smiling obsequiously. The woman only looked at the captain's smile. She did not say anything. The captain's face fell slightly as he registered what she meant by this. He walked back towards the door, smiled and bowed. Please rest, Miss Mirror. I will stop disturbing you. After he went out the door, the captain carefully shut it behind him without making the slightest sound. He did not want to disturb the woman. The woman was the only one left in the control room. She sat there elegantly, but she was too focused to look casual. She was the prime example of what it was to look like a woman. Bai Wei, Why are you doing this? The woman looked at Bai Wei, who was headed to the grave of soldiers and kings. She sighed and shook her head. Not long after, the woman turned her attention to Han Sun, who was traveling alongside Bai Wei. After a while, she spoke to herself. Narrow Moon's Knife Queen finally took a student. He practiced in Sky Palace for a few years. He returned to Narrow Moon when he became a Marquis. And then he became a backup knight for the Ice Blue Knights in the Systems of Chaos. He received a deified feather from Kong Fei. His circumstances have been favorable, but he has poor potential. The crystallizers are a lowly race that rely on the powers of others. Their own powers are weak, and their genes are no good. It is difficult for them to become deified. It may feel nice for Bai Wei to have someone with her, but using him as a royal guard will be way too much effort for the lackluster returns. Han Sun followed Bai Wei to the grave of soldiers and kings. The entire planet was a graveyard, and headstones sprouted from the ground everywhere they looked. But what was buried in the earth were not creatures or beings. They were xenogenic weapons. Han Sun wasn't really interested in those xenogenic weapons. He already had a deified thunder god spike and his ghost teeth knife. He really wasn't interested in ordinary treasure weapons. He would much rather find a deified class beast soul. Xenogenic weaponry, like the deified class thunder god spike, wasn't very useful for Han Senator. Instead of attacking, it could only leave a paralytic effect on a king or a half-deified being, and that was about it. And if the Thunder God Spike wasn't wielded by a king-class elite, its effects would be dramatically weakened. Han Sun and the others landed on the plaza of the grave of soldiers and kings. 9 bronze grave beasts lined each side of the plaza. The moment Han Sun stepped onto the plaza, the 18 bronze beasts came alive. They didn't look as if they were going to attack Han Sun and Bai Wei though. They opened their mouths. Then each of the beasts spat a weapon out onto the plaza. The 18 weapons were each different, and they all sat in front of their respective grave beast. Bai Wei was in battle mode already, and she said to Han Sun, "Each of these weapons will attack us once. We have to use our power to repel each strike. If we do that, we will be qualified to enter the grave of soldiers and kings to collect a weapon. We aren't allowed to use any xenogenic treasures. If we do, it is counted as a failure." As Bai Wei spoke, a lance gathered up a frightening amount of power. A black flame wreathed the weapon, as if a fiery demon was holding the lance. It came thrusting at Han Sun and Bai Wei. "I will block the first 9 attacks, while you block the last 9 attacks," Bai Wei said, preparing to intercept the lance's attack. But Han Sun stepped forward in front of Bai Wei, smiled and said, "Let me go first. When I cannot hold on anymore, you can take over with your attack." As the lance flew toward them like a demonic dragon, Han Sun summoned Jade Skin. He threw his fist against the tip of the lance. The woman in the control room frowned as she saw Han Sun send a punch toward the lance. The 18-weapon test isn't solely for testing the power of the royal children. It also teaches them that different powers require unique responses. That is the only way to pass the test. Han Sun is just fighting fire with fire. Even if he manages to destroy the lance's attack, his own power will be damaged too. When he tries to withstand the attacks of the other weapons, the strain will become harder and harder for him. He is strong, but he lacks a brain. A reckless man like this, well, I have no idea how he managed to earn the same title as Lone Bamboo. As the woman's attention flicked back to the screen, Han Sun's fist had already collided with the demonic dragon lance's tip. The fist and the spike came against each other. Boom! Under the force of that punch, the demonic dragon's body was crushed. It became dust scattering everywhere. Chapter 23. For using a fist to punch 18 soldiers. The 18 weapon strikes get stronger the closer to the end you are. The first hit is about the level of an ordinary duke level, striking with full strength. I suppose that an ordinary duke could break the lance with brute force. His fitness isn't too bad then. The woman in the control room thought that she was being pretty generous when she defined Han Sun as not bad. That level of fitness was common for the people of the Extreme King. Even Bai Wei, who had just become a duke, could probably do the same thing with her Extreme King punch. Han Sun's attack wasn't a very unusual thing for the woman to see. That woman likes smart and brave men. She didn't like reckless men, who fought with nothing more than muscle power. The woman believed that power could be increased in a number of different ways. If the intelligence and emotions of a person were weak, however, it would be hard for them to ever become strong. Han Sen's punch broke a lance, and immediately after, another weapon was flying toward him. The attacks didn't even give him a second to breathe. His assailant was a knife this time, and when the knife came soaring towards Han Sen, it took the image of a tiger that was ready to devour the world. It roared as it came for Han Senator Pang. Han Sen threw a punch, breaking the knife's tiger strike. That strong collision of powers didn't even leave a wound on Han Sen's mighty fist. It still glistened like white jade. The 18 weapons attacked Han Sen, one after another. Each weapon had its own special power. The lance had been precise, while the knife was strong. Next came a sword that could cause intense pain. Every strike from each weapon was performed in a very skilled and efficient manner. Normally, the princes and princesses could choose to fight on their own, or let their guards fight on their behalf. Depending on the element of the incoming weapon, they could select the best fighter to deal with each individual threat. But Han Sen didn't care about efficiency. It didn't matter if it was a sword or a lance or a stick coming for him. He demolished each one with a swing of his fist. By this point, 8 weapons had been wrecked by his hands. And the whole time, Han Sen's feet remained firmly planted in the same place he had started. His fitness isn't bad. If he plans to use his body's power to endure all 18 hits, though, that will be a very naive thing to attempt. Even if Lone Bamboo was here, he wouldn't be able to perform such a feat. The woman looked shocked. There were many who could break 8 weapons, but Han Sen was acting as if nothing remotely remarkable had occurred. Not just any duke could remain so calm under such circumstances. The 8 punches so far could easily earn Han Sen recognition as one of the top dukes. It was frightening to think that a duke who hadn't awakened their astral body could reach this level. Bai Wei stood behind Han Sen, and she looked a little bit confused. She understood that the 18 weapons would become a lot stronger towards the end. She wasn't confident she could complete the second set of 9 attacks. She had wanted Han Sen to do the last 9, while she did the first 9. But Han Sen had started fighting immediately. She was worried that Han Sen wouldn't have enough strength to reach the end. After all, Han Sen was just an original body duke. He wasn't like an astral body duke that could utilize the powers of a planet. He wasn't like a celestial body duke, either, who could use the power of the universe to heal themselves. Han Sen evidently planned to absorb all 18 hits. Bai Wei didn't think she could do something like that. If she had what it took, she wouldn't have asked Han Sen for help. Clearly, Bai Wei's worries were unfounded. The 18 weapons kept on attacking, but Han Sen was still as stable as a mountain. One hit, one weapon. He broke each and every attack. Regardless of the power or craftiness of the weapons' attacks, they could not escape Han Sen's powerful punches. A dozen weapons had been destroyed by Han Sen, and he was still behaving as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Bai Wei was staring at him in surprise, while the woman in the control room looked very strange. Boom! Han Sen punched the final weapon, and the woman in the control room looked stunned. No wonder he is considered to be on the same level as Lone Bamboo. He really does just depend on the power of the body. He is quite the character. But people like that can easily find themselves suppressed by higher-level enemies. After all, he is quite reckless. The woman then thought of something. She laughed and resumed talking to herself. This is good. Someone with such simple power will be easy to control. He won't be able to cause much trouble. He'll be a decent royal guard after all. Bai Wei made a fine choice. After that, the woman stood up and walked out of the control room. Now that Bai Wei and Han Sen had entered the grave of soldiers and kings, the camera would not be able to record them. There was no point in her hanging around. When the space station's captain saw the woman leaving, he wiped the cold sweat from his brow. That was too scary. It is fortunate that Miss Mirror didn't get angry. Being Bai King's little sister, the woman was very famous. The last king had made her marry a deified elite of the extreme king, but the man died in battle shortly after. She never sought to remarry ever since. Among the extreme king, Miss Mirror was only spoken of in hushed tones. People didn't fear her personal power. They feared her because she was in charge of King Bai's secret organization called Spring Rain. She was King Bai's most trusted confidant. Miss Mirror named her organization Spring Rain, but no one was ever really sure why. Han Sun broke the 18 weapons, and the grave beasts returned to looking like dead objects again. He and Bai Wei could now cross the plaza and enter the grave. Bai Wei looked at Han Sun strangely. He was just a duke, and yet he had managed to beat all 18 weapon strikes by himself. Not many people in the Extreme King could do something like that, but Han Sun appeared to have done it rather easily. He was a far more powerful person than she initially believed him to be. How are we going to take the weapons? Han Sun asked while looking at the graves and gravestones. Although he didn't really care about the xenogenic treasure, he wasn't going to miss out on any freebies. Bai Wei looked back, then glanced at the graves around them. She said, "The graves with a crown symbol carved into them are the graves belonging to one of the royal family. You cannot take the weapons buried in those. The weapons of any other grave can be taken, however. Just push the grave open and take the weapon inside." "Is it really that easy?" Han Sun asked, unconvinced. Bai Wei shook her head. "It's not that simple, you're right. We don't know who is buried in which grave. Because of that, we don't know which graves contain good weapons. Once you have pushed the grave open, it doesn't matter if the weapon inside is good or bad. You still have to take it. No swapping either. You only have one chance. It is a shame I don't have someone like Mr. White. He could definitely calculate which grave has a deified weapon. In that case, I could base my choice on something more than dumb luck." After pausing, Bai Wei resumed speaking. "Luckily, we have come here mainly to gain access to the king's garden. I would be thrilled to get a high-class treasure, but it is fine if that is not what I receive. Since we are here, I am going to get one no matter what." Han Sun laughed as he looked across the graves. Han Sun wasn't a fan of luck. His Xianmen wasn't perfect, and nowhere near Mr. White's level. So he used his Dongxian aura and Purple Eye Butterfly to examine the graves. Chapter 2305, Choosing a Weapon. Each grave had a special kind of spellwork laid across it. The veil of energy made it impossible to see what sort of treasure might lie within. But through the viewpoint of the Purple Eye Butterfly, Han Sun could see a replay of how the grave was constructed that allowed him to see what was inside. Bai Wei didn't have any powers like that, so she didn't want to waste time contemplating the fickleness of luck. She walked over to the closest crown grave, clearly intending to push it open. "Hang on." Han Sun stopped Bai Wei from opening the grave. The grave that Bai Wei was standing over held a decent weapon, but its level was still pretty low. It would be useless for their purposes. "What?" Bai Wei looked at Han Sun with some confusion. "That gravestone isn't suitable for you. We should look around some more." Han Sun smiled. Now that his ability to get resources was somewhat dependent on Bai Wei's strength, Han Sun had to spare some concern for her development. The stronger Bai Wei became, the more resources he himself could enjoy. Han Sun wanted to help her as much as possible, because at the end of the day, he'd be helping himself. If she grew stronger, he would also benefit. Bai Wei looked at Han Sun for a while. Then she said, "Which gravestone suits me then? Let's look around for a bit," Han Sun said, walking forward. The grave of soldiers and kings was a very large planet. There were many xenogenic treasures buried there, but most of them were useless. Although the ones with a crown symbol were usually better, their power was still dependent on their level. And these weapons were low level. Han Sun's target was a deified weapon. If they couldn't find one of those, he would settle for a lesser weapon, like a king-class weapon. Bai Wei walked behind Han. Senator Han Sun looked at all the graves, but she didn't know what he was seeing. If Han Sun could determine something about the contents of the graves, she had no idea how. "What kind of weapon do you want?" Han Sun asked as he looked around. "Can I pick?" Bai Wei looked at Han Sun strangely. "Make a wish. What if it comes true? You should always have a dream." Han Sun smiled. Bai Wei looked at Han Sun for a while and said, "If possible, I would like a sword." Bai Wei figured that Han Sun would only ask her that question if he had some secret way of determining which weapon was inside each grave. That sounded rather unbelievable to her though. Royals always had trouble obtaining the weapons that they wanted in the grave of soldiers and kings, because of the veil covering every grave. The spellwork prevented weapon seekers from using their powers to see into the graves. Inside the grave, only two powers could be used: luck and intense calculations. Luck was something very important both for commoners and nobles. At least, that's what Bai Wei believed. Even the mathematics necessary to find the weapons was a quantification of luck. So, choosing a weapon was a test of luck, regardless of whether you attempted to calculate their positions like Mr. Whitewood. Although luck couldn't really be forced, selecting a high-class xenogeneic weapon would really impress King Bai. It was very important to his sons and daughters. Han Sen kept looking around. When they reached a peak and walked right up to a small grave, he stopped. The grave was only a meter high, and the tablet was breaking. But Han Sen was able to replay the process of creation with his purple-eye butterfly, which revealed that a powerful deified sword resided within. It had to be a sword that once belonged to a deified king. This is it. Han Sen pointed at the little grave. What is in the grave? Bai Wei didn't move. She looked at Han Sr. Who knows? Perhaps it will be something that makes your wish come true. Han Sen laughed. After Bai Wei heard him, she stared at the grave for a while. Then she turned around to leave. You don't want to open it? Han Sen asked Bai Wei in shock. I trust your judgment, but please find another grave for me. I would like a king-class weapon if possible, Bai Wei said seriously. Han Sen nodded. He kept leading Bai Wei. He started to look at Bai Wei differently. Although Bai Wei was the daughter of a king, she wasn't loved, and she hadn't been raised with a silver spoon. She wouldn't have many chances to receive a deified item. Now that there was one in front of her, she was willing to give it up. Not many people could do something like that. The grave of soldiers and kings was a test for all the princes and princesses. Although choosing a good weapon didn't actually mean you were better than others, the weapon would still draw attention. If Bai Wei took a deified weapon, many eyes would turn toward her. It was difficult to guess how people would react. Even if they knew that Bai Wei had only gotten the weapon because of luck, they might still resent her for it. Perhaps Bai Wei would become hated. Bai Wei gave up on the prospect of getting a deified weapon, planning to settle for a king-class weapon instead. It would keep others from becoming intensely jealous of her. And at the same time, it'd be enough to give Bai King a decent impression of her. Considering her current situation, this was probably the best choice for her. It seems that Bai Wei is very ambitious, Han Sen thought to himself. If a person was careless, they would simply have taken that deified weapon. Bai Wei's choice proved she was very ambitious, and that actually worried him. Han Sen kept walking until he reached another crown grave. He pointed at it and said, "Try this one. Perhaps you will get something you like." Bai Wei didn't hesitate. She pushed the grave open, and the gravestone cracked, revealing a rectangular box inside. Bai Wei opened the box. A large golden sword lay within. She grinned widely. This is the sword that a king used to become deified. It is the king-class gold phoenix greatsword. You are really good, Bai Wei said after merely glancing at the sword. She looked straight at Han Sen, taking stock of him. Bai Wei had always looked up to Han Sen. But even so, Han Sen's performances never failed to surprise her. It was just luck. Han Sen laughed. He looked around and said, "It is now my turn to pick a weapon. I can pick a weapon from any gravestone that doesn't have a crown on it, correct?" "Yes, you can. And you don't have to worry about people finding out what weapon you take. The weapons the royal guards select do not have to be registered. No one would pay attention. Plus, aside from the royal relics, it's almost impossible to find deified weapons," Bai Wei said. Han Sen nodded, and then kept walking. He kept looking at every grave. Ordinary graves were just boxes of useless treasure. Most of the items were average quality at best. Picking out a good one for himself would be much harder than it had been for Bai Wei. Han Sen walked for 2 hours before coming to a stop before a specific grave. Nothing about the grave seemed special, but after Han Sen took a look, he pushed it open without hesitation. There was a little box inside the grave. The box was small, only around the size of a hand. It looked too small to hold any powerful weapon. Han Sen didn't look surprised though. He opened the box and took out the ring it possessed. Chapter 2306 King Tree. The ring gleamed a beautiful silver, and there was a green jewel-like eye at its top. It looked gorgeous. Han's son turned the ring over and over in his hands, his face set in intense concentration. He had chosen the ring because he was unable to identify its level. If something could block the vision of the purple-eye butterfly, then it had to be good. There was every chance that it was also a deified item. Han's son wasn't as concerned with consequences as Bai Wei had been, so he picked this ring immediately. But as Han's son played with the ring, he realized he was unable to activate whatever power it possessed. Han's son tried to trigger it by sending his own power into the ring, but there was no response. It was like an ordinary toy. Why is there a ring here? What level is it? Bai Wei, upon seeing the ring, couldn't help but frown. There should only have been weapons in the grave of soldiers and kings. She had never heard of anything else being found. I don't know. Maybe I can't activate it because the power of my element isn't correctly aligned, Han's son thought. Then he put the ring on his finger and said, I have already chosen this, so there's no time for regret. Come on, let's go. Bai Wei looked at the ring on Han's son's hand, and she didn't say anything. Together, they left the grave of soldiers and kings, and hurried towards the king's garden. Bai Wei didn't really care about the weapon she had chosen. She was in a rush to leave the grave, so that she could finally train in the king's garden. The king's garden was at the center of the king's kingdom. Han's son and Bai Wei journeyed into the heart of the king's kingdom, and suddenly, Han's son's eyes brightened. A giant xenogeniac emerged from the darkness of space, and flew right past them. It was as big as a planet, and it looked like a dinosaur from ancient times, but flames crackled across its body. That is a flaming demon dragon. It is a deified xenogeniac that patrols the entirety of the king's kingdom, Bai Wei said. The king's kingdom was grander than Han's son had imagined. There were many strange things there that continually snared his attention, so much so that he found it difficult to look away from the sights. Everywhere he looked, a myriad of creatures swept past them. Suddenly Han's son saw something. He could not control his face at the sight, and so his jaw went slack. What is it? Bai Wei asked apprehensively. She had seen Han's son in all sorts of dangerous situations before, but he had never made a face like that. What is that? Han's son asked, pointing out in front of them. Han's son pointed to an area in the system that had no day or night cycle. There was a giant building that looked like a star, but rather than residing on a planet, the entire building hung in space. It was an ancient tower. It hung ethereally in space, like some kind of strange mirage. It was very old, mysterious, and cold. It felt like it didn't belong to that world, as it didn't match anything around it. The tower was made of black stones, and it had 7 floors. A black bell hung from each corner of the tower, but the bells weren't tolling at all. It was like they were frozen. They hung completely motionless, looking rather dead. It wasn't the tower's strange appearance that shocked Han's son. He was caught off guard by the fact that the tower looked exactly like Destiny's tower. But this tower had been built from black stones, while Destiny's tower was made entirely of metal. Everything else was the same though. And when Han's son saw the word Destiny written on the side of the tower, his stomach clenched. The word wasn't written in the common language of the Geno universe either. It was written in one of the ancient languages of the Alliance. Bai Wei followed Han's son's finger to the old tower that hung in space. After a pause she said, "That is our holy tower. Only people who have performed amazing deeds are allowed to study in there." Holy tower. Han's son looked at Bai Wei with some confusion, hoping she could explain. Bai Wei shook her head. "I don't know much about the holy tower. I only know that it is very mysterious. Anyone who enters it will become much stronger when they come back out. But only those of the extreme king, who have performed amazing feats, are allowed entry. And no one who comes back out of the tower talks about what they saw inside. I don't know what is in there." After pausing, Bai Wei said, "I have heard there is a mysterious Geno art in there. It's a powerful art that provides great aid to any who learn it. But the people who go in usually emerge having learned different Geno arts. It's difficult to guess what actually happens in the tower, and these are just rumors. I don't know how true they are." Only those who enter will know what is inside. Is it something that some ancestor of the extreme king left behind? Hansen asked, trying to suppress his shock. I don't think so. The legends say that the Holy Tower already existed when the king's kingdom Xenogenic space was discovered. It is the same with Sky Palace's White Jade Jing. No one really knows why they exist. Is this Destiny Tower connected with my Destiny's Tower? Going by what I've learned of history here, when the Extreme King's Holy Tower appeared, there should not have been any humans yet. Why is there alliance text on the tower, then? Hansen couldn't stop thinking about this, but he could not figure it out. Hansen was dying to enter the tower to take a look, but he wouldn't be allowed to even get close to the tower. It took all of his willpower to keep from staring at that ancient tower. To distract himself, he turned his attention back to the King's Garden. King's Garden wasn't a planet, but a piece of land floating in space. It looked larger and lusher than a planet though. A giant tree stood in the middle of the island in space, the tree's enormous canopy shading the entire landmass. It was too big to be properly described. The tree's body was black and its leaves were yellow. It looked very pretty. After they got close to King's Garden, Hansen felt just how scary that king tree was. Even a random leaf was bigger than an entire football stadium. Weird symbols were etched all across the leaves. As Hansen got closer, the symbols turned out to be the veins of the leaves. But each vein was unique, and they all possessed a mysterious shifting power. The king tree is the extreme king's source of culture. The symbols were adopted into the language of the extreme king. Now the official language of the extreme king is Kingese. We only use the universal language with outsiders, Bai Wei explained. Hansen nodded, and then he entered King's Garden with Bai Wei. The mountains and rivers were all underneath that king tree. It was hard to describe how glorious it all looked. Once they landed on King's Garden, Hansen looked around dumbfounded. There were real dragons living near the mountains and rivers. They all had frightening presences, like godly creatures from ancient times. They are not real dragons. They are the roots of the king tree, Bai Wei said. Chapter 2307 King Dragon. Hansen couldn't believe that the dragons soaring across the landscape were actually tree roots. They had the heads of dragons, the horns of dragons, the teeth of dragons, and the scales of dragons. They looked so alive, and they didn't look like plants at all. As Hansen watched them, a flock of birds landed on the back of one of the dragons. The dragon roared, shaking the creature's beard and exposing its rows of razor-sharp teeth. The dragon's roar was so loud that it shook the air, scattering all the birds. It really was a living, breathing dragon, Bai Wei explained. The king tree grows on a landmass inside the king's kingdom, and occasionally, parts of the tree spawn into king root dragons. The king air is hidden inside the king roots. To absorb the king air, you have to sit on one of those king dragons. Every king dragon is different, and each one provides access to a different type of king air. How much king air you can absorb also depends on how far away from the tree a particular dragon is. Sitting on a dragon close to the tree provides the most king air. The further away you are, the less you get. I see. Why is there no one else around? Hansen nodded and looked around. He didn't see any of the extreme king absorbing king air around them. We are at the edge of King's Garden. These are the ends of the king roots, so the king air isn't strong here. Those of our race usually sit closer to the tree to absorb the most king air. This is our first time coming here, so let's find a king dragon here. After speaking, Bai Wei went towards a king dragon. They were a few miles away from the nearest king dragon. As they approached, the king dragon roared at them, as if it was warning them to keep away. Bai Wei and Hansen ignored the warning, continuing toward the king dragon. The king dragon moved its massive body. It shook the mountain in an attempt to halt Bai Wei and Hansen's approach. Hansen noticed that he could only see half of the king dragon's body. The other half of the dragon was somewhere underground. It couldn't fly, so it just had to shake its body in an attempt to shoo them off. The king dragon was powerful, but it couldn't release its power. Its body was restricted as well. It had no chance of stopping Hansen and Bai Wei. They landed easily atop its dragon horns. The king dragon thrashed around for a while, but when its writhing failed to shake Han's son and Bai Wei off, it eventually grew quiet and laid down again. Han's son sat on the dragon's head, but he didn't feel any of the king air. He looked at Bai Wei. Bai Wei smiled. You will understand soon. Han's son resigned himself to waiting. The king dragon here was at the periphery of the roots. There wasn't much king air, but the king dragon's power was too weak to touch them. After a while, the yellow leaves on the tree started to light up. The king's characters were shown gold as the king tree lit with a holy light. It was like a godly tree that gave life to everything in its domain. All of the dragons started to roar as they shifted and roused themselves. Before Han's son could find out what was going on, the king dragon he was atop put its head into the ground. The ground was like water as the king dragon sank into it. Han's son and Bai Wei were still sitting atop the dragon's head, so they were carried underground as well. Their subterranean surroundings should have been dark, but they could see a light, as if it was glowing underwater. Something gold shone like a sun, but it was blurry and distant. The king dragon sat far away from that gold sun. It faced the gold sun, opened its dragon mouth, and spat out a dragon orb. The sun released golden light that shot into the dragon orb. The glow of the dragon orb increased. Han's son was frozen. He was still wrapping his mind around the fact that they were underground. Come and absorb the king air. What are you waiting for? Bai Wei reminded Han's son, as she cast a Geno art. When Bai Wei cast her Geno art, the golden sun released some gold light into her body. Her form was suddenly surrounded by a layer of golden holy light. Han's son cast the story of genes to try to absorb that golden light. He felt something hot running into him, combining with his sense of being, but there wasn't much of it. Refining his ghost bone power would be faster. The legs of a mosquito are still meat, and so Han's son did his best to absorb as much of that golden light as possible. But after 1 hour, the king dragon retrieved its dragon orb. It roared and brought them back up to the surface. There's not enough king air, and we have too little time to absorb it. Han's son shook his head. This king dragon is part of the outer reaches of the king tree. To get closer to the king pulse, and make it last longer, you must find a king dragon that is connected to the primary roots, Bai Wei said. Well, what are we waiting for? Han's son was dying to find a source of purer power. The primary roots are usually taken. If we get close, we'll have to fight others for it. Bai Wei sighed. There must be a few of them that arrive late, Han's son said. Bai Wei shook her head. In here, power is the rule that governs everything. If you have the power, you can take over whatever you wish to. If you don't have power, you have to make use of an ordinary beard. You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't kill anyone. That father you guys have isn't very caring. Doesn't he treat the daughters nicer? Han's son looked depressed. No, Bai Wei answered without a second thought. In that case, we really will have to go and take what we want, Han's son said. Then, he walked deeper into the king tree. Bai Wei said nothing, and she simply followed Han's senator. They were both dukes, and there were only 2 of them. Getting one of the primary roots would be next to impossible. After all, only king-class elites took primary roots, and they always had a team of royal guards beside them. It would be difficult to fight people like that for a root. Bai Wei wasn't planning on fighting though. She wanted to try her luck, and see if she could just find an unoccupied primary root. After all, the royal children weren't allowed to go there every day, and the royal guards had to be accompanied by royal children, so they couldn't go alone. So if they were lucky, it wouldn't be difficult to find a primary root. The closer to the king tree they got, the scarier the king dragons became. Most king dragons were a dirty yellow color. It wasn't long before they encountered a king dragon that had gold scales. It was just resting on the ground. That's the king dragon of a primary root. Bai Wei was ecstatic, because no one else was making use of the gold dragon. It was obviously not taken. Han's son and Bai Wei carefully sat down atop the gold king dragon. The gold king dragon was still asleep, though, and it didn't appear to have noticed their presence. The 2 of them just sat on its head. These king dragons have just absorbed some king air. They won't go back into the ground for a while, so let's wait here. Bai Wei was in fine spirits, and she smiled at Han Sr. Han Sun and Bai Wei spent a few hours waiting atop the golden king dragon. The king dragon still hadn't gone underground when a few men approached them. That made Bai Wei feel rather nervous. Because Han Sen's eyes were better than Bai Wei's, he knew exactly who was coming. The sight made him frown. The leader of the group was none other than Prince 14 Bai Songlong. The people following him had to be his royal guards. There were 4 of them, 2 of the Lane race, 1 Ghana, and 1 female of the Extreme King. The 4 guards had an intimidating aura. They had to be at least king class. And on top of that, the female Extreme King was familiar to Han Senator. When Han Sun looked closer, however, he realized that he didn't actually know her. Brother 14. When Bai Wei saw Bai Songlong, her face paled. She was too weak to compete with Bai Songlong and she knew it. Bai Wei walked up to him and bowed. Greetings, Brother 14. Bai Songlong looked at Bai Wei. He waved his hand. Since you now have access to the king's garden, you are nothing but a competitor to me. There is no need for you to remain so polite. After that, Bai Songlong glanced over her shoulder, his eyes barely flicking to Han Sun before returning to Bai Wei. He coldly said, "But you are my little sister. As a big brother, I shouldn't be the one to bully you. Choose one of these 4 knights. If you can withstand one of their blows, you can keep this primary root king dragon." Brother 14, you must be kidding. If you want it, just take it. We can go and find another king dragon. Bai Wei bowed and readied herself to depart. Bai Songlong stepped over and grabbed Bai Wei by the arm. He smiled, showing his teeth. Sister Wei, don't think so little of yourself. You are in the king's garden. You cannot avoid a little healthy competition. You should get used to it, sooner rather than later. But don't worry, Brother 14 won't steal your king dragon. I just want you to understand how you are expected to survive here in the king's garden. Bai Wei forced a smile. Thank you, Brother 14. I don't dare to overstep my bounds, though. I don't want to fight with anyone. And I would much prefer a stable existence here. It is fine. Win or lose, you can have this primary root king dragon. Bai Songlong was still holding onto her arm as he spoke to her. A primary root king dragon was nothing to a prince like Bai Songlong. If he did not take this one, it would be easy for him to find another. Bai Songlong was forcing Bai Wei into this position because of Han Senator. He wanted Han Sun to know that following Bai Wei was a big mistake. Han Sun saw that Bai Songlong had grabbed Bai Wei's arm and was keeping her there. So he walked over smoothly and bowed to Bai Wei. If you insist, Prince 14, then I am willing to do this for my queen. Bai Wei was about to say something, but Bai Songlong had started speaking already. Ah, you are Knife Queen's student indeed. So brave. I greatly admire brave individuals like you. Please pick one of the 4 guards next to me. Whether you withstand the attack or not, you will still keep this king dragon. After that, Bai Songlong turned to the 4 guards in his company. Han Sun is Knife Queen's student. I am good friends with Knife Queen. You guys cannot hurt her student too much. So please don't go overkill with your powers. Okay. Han Sun looked at the 4 guards and hesitated. He went to the Extreme King female guard and said, "If you please. Red Sleeve, do not hurt him." Bai Songlong said firmly to the female guard. "Yes," the female guard answered. She walked in front of Songlong to stand directly before Han Sr. "I am Han Senator, what is your name?" Han Sun greeted the female guard. It didn't really matter which guard he selected. Every single one there was a higher level than him. He had selected her simply because he thought she seemed familiar. He just couldn't remember where he might have seen her before. By doing this, he hoped to jog his memory and confirm his sense of familiarity. "Red Sleeve," the female guard answered shortly. She raised her fist and said, "If you can take my punch without falling, then you win." After that, the fist started to glow with light. The light was like a moon, and wherever the moon shone, the fabric of space twisted. Han Sun shifted his body a little. He felt as if the area around him was being stretched. After he moved his body, he was still where he had been. Space powers. Han Sun was shocked. Red Sleeve's fist hurtled toward him. It was like a moon falling. Han Sun moved, but her powers seemed to be locking him in place. And that moon was coming closer. Han Sun squinted and looked at that coming moon. If he couldn't dodge, Then he wasn't going to dodge. He lifted a fist and punched towards the moon. Bai Wei looked ill. Red Sleeve was a king-class elite. She might have even been half-deified. Han Sun, on the other hand, had only just become a duke. No matter how strong he was, there was no way he could fight Red Sleeve in such a manner. Bai Wei knew exactly what Bai Songlong was up to with all these theatrics. If Han Sun took this punch, he would be seriously injured, if not killed outright. Pang! At that moment, Red Sleeve's fist came into contact with Han Sun's own fist. The moon shattered like glass, and the space nearby also broke, cracks running through reality around Han Sun's body. Bai Wei was stunned. She had been sure that Red Sleeve wouldn't dare kill anyone inside King's Garden. But the woman had exerted her power with the obvious intent to kill. Han Sun's body had been annihilated by space power. Unless Han Sun had a very strong revival power, he wouldn't even have a chance to recover over time. Living was no longer possible. Han Sun's body was ripped open. His form then exploded like water, scattering everywhere. But then, another image of Han Sun became visible in exactly the same place that he had previously stood. He was in perfect condition, and he was just standing there. The Han Sun that the moon had wrecked was just a doppelganger built using the moon technique. I am useless. Please punish me, my prince. Red Sleeve looked horrified. She bowed before Bai Songlong to apologize. Han Sun's doppelganger technique is amazing. It even fooled me. In that case, I couldn't expect you to have seen through it. Bai Songlong waved his hand and gestured for her to fall back. He smiled to Han Sr., you are better than your teacher. It is no wonder that you are Knife Queen's student. I am so close with your teacher. If you have time, you should come and visit me. After that, Bai Songlong told Bai Wei, Sister Wei, I am so happy that you managed to enlist such a good guard. You can have this primary root king dragon. I am going to look for another. I will see you later. After Bai Songlong left, Bai Wei spoke to Han Sr., that was way too risky. You almost died. I am fine though, aren't I? Han Sun laughed. As he turned his gaze back to Bai Songlong, an expression of deep thought crossed his face. Bai Songlong took his 4 guards with him as he marched away. He turned hard eyes on Red Sleeve and said, Who told you that you could cast a deadly attack on Han Sun? Maybe we can overlook the fact that Knife Queen rejected your offer. But for that duke to disobey your wishes? I just wanted to make an example of what can happen to anyone who dares to cross you. Red Sleeve said as she lowered her head. I can take care of my own business. Don't do that again, or I'll see to it that your life ends there. Bai Songlong grunted coldly, and then he said, It was fortunate that you were unable to kill him. Not even I would be able to pull enough strings to get you pardoned for murdering someone in King's Garden. I was being reckless. Please punish me. Red Sleeve quickly bowed. Whatever. Just don't do it again. Bai Songlong waved his hand and began to search for another primary root king dragon. Because primary root king dragons showed up in different locations every time, the royal children were forced to search a new king dragon out every time they wanted to train. The only other option was to never leave the king dragon, even when the tree wasn't releasing golden light. Han Sun and Bai Wei climbed back atop their primary root king dragon. They waited there for another chance to be taken underground. Luckily, only the royal children were permitted to access the king's garden, and there weren't many of them. King Bai only had 100 children. Han Sun and Bai Wei had some luck. Aside from Bai Songlong, they encountered no other royal children. No one showed up over the next 10 hours, and Han Sun thought that their training might go smoothly. But then he noticed someone flying quickly toward him. Bai Wuchang, Han Sun said, startled by the man's sudden appearance. It was the same man he had met in the space station. Bai Wuchang was clearly coming to see Han Senator. Bai Wei blanched when she saw him coming. But by then it was too late to run. Han Senator, why did you not come when I asked? Bai Wuchang hung in the air, staring down at Han Sr. I never agreed to come. Han Sun raised his hands as he spoke. When Bai Wuchang heard Han Sun, his face did not move a muscle. His features were as still as stone, which gave him a great poker face. In that case, how about you and I fight right here? I am Bai Wei's guard, not some stadium gladiator. I will not accept. Before Han Sun could finish, Bai Wuchang swung his knife at him. Shit. Is everyone in the Extreme King this unreasonable? Han Sun pulled out Ghost Teeth knife to block Bai Wuchang's sucker strike. Clang! The knives collided. Bai Wuchang was slashing downward, while Han Sun was pushing up. Purple and white knife airs came against each other. The knife airs broke and spread out everywhere. Because Han Sun was standing atop the King Dragon's head, the shattered knife air hit the primary root King Dragon and woke up the sleeping beast. The primary root King Dragon roared. Its body rose, and its golden dragon scales shook as it swung its head. The primary root King Dragon couldn't release its power, but even its physical strength was terrifying. The power of its head swing was capable of breaking the fabric of space. It created a teleportation and shadow effect, leaving behind afterimages of its head as it moved. Han Sun, Bai Wuchang, and Bai Wei were thrown off. Bai Wuchang barely seemed to notice. He slashed at Han Sun from the air again. His knife was like ice. The blade was very cold, but the power it exuded seemed minimal. It didn't unleash ice power. It was very weird. Han Sun's Ghost Teeth knife came against Bai Wuchang's knife twice, and neither of them appeared to have an advantage over the other. The primary root King Dragon roared and tried to consume them. Han Sun flapped his wings and teleported. He wanted to get away from that angry primary root King Dragon, but Bai Wuchang mindlessly rushed after him, without a care in the world for anything else. Bai Wuchang kept chasing him, and the King Dragon kept trying to consume them. It made Han Sun angry. He pushed his Jade Skin and Blood Pulse Sutra to the max. He focused on Bai Wuchang, who was drawing near, and slashed towards him. Dong! Bai Wuchang was a duke too. Han Sun's blow landed on him and knocked him away. He fell a few thousand meters before he came to a stop. Good, good, good. Now I see why you are considered to be on the same level as Lone Bamboo. You did not disappoint me. Bai Wuchang wasn't angry but happy. He smiled, but his face was way too stiff. The smile looked strangely forced as a result. It made people feel uncomfortable whenever they saw it. While they were talking, a cold white air erupted from Bai Wuchang's body. The cold air turned into an icy fire that gave off no heat. With the cold fire burning, Bai Wuchang's body started to look transparent within his white armor. He was like a translucent phantom. Phantom Ghost King body. Han Sun, get back. Bai Wei ran in front of Han Sun and placed him behind her. She spoke to Bai Wuchang. Brother Wuchang, you are a prince. Attacking my royal guard like this will damage your reputation. People like Han Sun aren't worthy of being your enemies. Bai Wei knew Bai Wuchang's true capabilities. The king body of an extreme king was usually activated at king class. It was one of the reasons that Bai Wei was looking forward to king class. This was true for all of the extreme king, with the sole exception that was Bai Wuchang. When he was a viscount, his king body awoke. He was very talented. In the extreme king, where everyone was so rich and powerful, he was a genius of extreme rarity. He usually didn't need his king body to beat opponents of the same level though. With his Phantom Ghost King body, he could challenge king class elites. Since Bai Wuchang had activated his Phantom Ghost King body against Han Sun, it was evident that he was taking this fight quite seriously. The rules of King's Garden applied to all the royal children, but Bai Wuchang didn't seem to care. He was completely ignoring the King's Garden rule that forbade murder. Bai Wuchang's eyes danced with excitement. It was as if he didn't see Bai Wei at all. He stared at Han Sun and said, "Come on, fight me." Is this guy insane? Han Sun sighed. He felt as if he was a magnet for nutcases. Before, Bar wanted to kill him, and now Bai Wuchang. Han Sun wondered if there was something special about his body that made him attract such crazed individuals. Bai Wei started to say something, but Bai Wuchang was already slashing downwards. In his eyes, it was as if she did not exist. He came swinging at Han Senator, but Bai Wei stayed in front of Han Senator. She was going to take the blow instead. Bai Wei frowned and gathered up an invisible power in her fist. She was going to cast her Extreme King Punch, but all of a sudden she felt something tighten around her waist. A strong arm grabbed her and yanked her backward. Han Sun stood in front of Bai Wei. His eyes were so clear, and his ghost teeth knife was brimming with a dark purple knife air. It rose to meet Bai Wuchang's knife. Bai Wei was now behind Han Sun, and she shouted over his shoulder, "Be careful. His phantom ghost king body can attack both your physical self and the very essence of your soul. Don't let him get close to you." After Bai Wei said that, Bai Wuchang's knife came down on Han Sen's ghost teeth knife. Bai Wuchang's knife didn't even seem to have a corporeal form. It pierced through Han Sen's blade, carrying Bai Wuchang's body through the ghost teeth knife, and the teeth power. He came slashing towards Han Sun like a real ghost. The cold flame was about to touch Han Sen's hand. Han Sun squinted his eyes and moved his feet. Still holding Bai Wei by the waist, he teleported away. Bai Wuchang was fast though, and his attacks never paused. He slashed behind Han Sun like a bug on his skin. Han Sun did not dodge. He took a swing at Bai Wuchang's knife. Bai Wei was confused. After seeing the man's previous strikes, Han Sun should have known that Bai Wuchang's phantom ghost king body couldn't be challenged by ordinary weapons. His knife wouldn't be able to block Bai Wuchang's strikes. Dong! Two knives came against each other with a metallic shriek. Bai Wei's eyes widened, overwhelmed by utter disbelief. Bai Wuchang's phantom ghost king body had been blocked. How is that possible? Shock reverberated through Bai Wei. Han Sen's first attempt to block Bai Wuchang's phantom ghost king body had utterly failed. But this time it seemed to be working. Bai Wuchang was surprised as well. But ultimately, he looked even more excited. His knife slashed toward Han Sun, like some ghost from the phantom world. Han Sun put down Bai Wei, and used his knife skills to fight back against Bai Wuchang. He moved around continually, and he blocked each of Bai Wuchang's strikes. The fierce fighting soon drew the attention of all the nearby royal children. They could sense the ghostly echoes of Bai Wuchang's strange power. Phantom Ghost King Body's signature style was well known, and people could feel its presence from great distances away. Bai Wuchang has gone mad again. Who is the unlucky one this time? That Phantom Ghost King Body is too scary. There aren't many substances that are able to harm Bai Wuchang. Even many king-class opponents can do nothing to stop him. Of course. Otherwise, why would the king love him so much? Many people stood in close proximity to the fight. They wanted to see who had been unlucky enough to draw Bai Wuchang's attention. Bai Zhonglong sensed the activation of the Phantom Ghost King Body and frowned. He said, "It's coming from behind us. Does that mean that Bai Wei is the one battling Bai Wuchang?" A while later, Bai Zhonglong rallied his guards to follow him back. Who is this guy Bai Wuchang is fighting? His knife is able to block the Phantom Ghost King Body. A few of the royal children had drawn near, and they were shocked to witness the fight unfolding between Han Sun and Bai Wuchang. Some powers were known to be able to counter the Phantom Ghost King Body, but only a few. It was quite remarkable that a duke they had never seen before could block the Phantom Ghost King Body. He didn't appear to be at a disadvantage against Bai Wuchang, either. The sight was quite unusual. When Bai Zhonglong saw the fight, he was also stunned. He frowned and said, "The rebate's teeth knife does wield a good deal of destructive power, but it shouldn't work very well on the Phantom Ghost King Body." How is Han Sun managing to block the Phantom Ghost King Body? Does his knife possess some special element? The other royal children were thinking similar thoughts. Only Bai Wei and Bai Wuchang knew Han Sen's knife wasn't actually able to block the Phantom Ghost King Body. The others that had come were unable to discern the difference. Han Sun wasn't using pure teeth power. Instead, he had mixed in another technique. He was fueling teeth knife with power from the story of genes, which could last forever. Teeth power was unable to touch Bai Wuchang by itself, but the eternally solidified power in combination with teeth knife was able to strike the Phantom Ghost King Body. Who is this duke? Many of the royal children looked on with gaping mouths. Not only could Han Sun touch the Phantom Ghost King Body, but his power and knife skills were proving to be just as good as Bai Wuchang's. His techniques and movement patterns were weird, and Bai Wuchang seemed to be having difficulty fighting him. Han Sun's movements were very light. The ghost teeth knife looked as if it was casually dancing, but every skill was very accurate and focused. It made Bai Wuchang feel as if he couldn't make use of much power. His knife skills look like the skills of the rebate, but the way he moves seems different. It looks like something you'd see in Sky Palace. The Extreme King had many elites, so they had an easier time identifying some of Han Sen's peculiarities. Han Sen's teeth knife was combined with the Under the Sky knife skill. Because Under the Sky had just been discovered, not many people in Sky Palace had learned it yet. And so not many people had seen it before. But with that being said, people were able to guess that it was indeed a skill born in Sky Palace. Great. Where does this Duke come from? His knife skills are excellent. If we are just talking about his abilities with a knife, I would say he is definitely stronger than Bai Wuchang. Where did such a powerful Duke like this come from? I wonder which royal child's guard he is? Han Sen suddenly fell back and slashed Ghost Teeth knife forward. Dark purple knife silks floated down from space, wispy and half-transparent. They meshed together and began to bind Bai Wuchang. Bai Wuchang's body was snared by the cloud of knife silks. He couldn't move, and he was tied up in the air. Bai Wuchang roared to the sky like a beast, and his cold flame blazed higher. He cut the knife silks off his body, then madly rushed towards Han. Senator Han Sen moved. His ghost teeth knife seemed to slash in a meandering, casual way. The knife silks kept appearing around Bai Wuchang, though, and it was like many spider webs were falling across him. They restricted his body, limiting his ability to fight back. Although Bai Wuchang kept forcing his power to surge in order to break the knife silks wrapped around him, he couldn't make his way to Han. Senator. He burst through the nets many times. But he was starting to have difficulty summoning enough strength. And while he was taking damage, he was losing more and more of his power reserves. Not long after, Bai Wuchang's cold flame became unstable. It flickered wildly, making the semi-transparent body look solid. Han Sen's ghost teeth knife was thrust forward. Bai Wuchang's body was tightly bound, and this time, no matter how hard he tried, Bai Wuchang didn't have the power to free himself. He could no longer break the knife silks that had locked him in place. The knife silks had reoriented themselves to hang him upside down. He could not free himself. All of the royal children seemed to be frozen. Bai Wuchang had been strung up like a caught rabbit while fighting a duke. The news spread through the Extreme King like wildfire. It became a well-known tale far and wide. Bai Wuchang had been beaten and hung upside down by a duke. And that duke was Bai Wei's own royal guard. No one believed the story when they first heard it. After all, Bai Wuchang had the infamous Phantom Ghost King body. He was the sort of foe that gave king-class opponents headaches. How could he have been beaten so handily by a mere duke? Those who didn't believe the tale soon discovered that the story was true, of course. Some of the royal children had taken videos of Han Sen and Bai Wuchang's fight. They were published all across the Extreme King's internet. The video was hastily downloaded and watched by many people. Shit! Who is this guy? He has such sneaky knife skills. Too sneaky. He didn't gain victory by fighting Bai Wuchang face to face. With those invisible knife silks to exhaust all of the prince's powers, I wouldn't even call this a fight. You know nothing. That is precisely why this duke is so scary. Even Prince Wuchang couldn't level the fight between them. It is scary. Prince Bai Wuchang's Phantom Ghost King body has always defied restrictions, and that duke bound him anyway. That man's power is frightening. It seemed to resemble the Rebate's teeth knife actually. But teeth knife cannot produce silks like that. And there's no way it could touch the Phantom Ghost King body. The fight became a hotly debated topic. They were used to Bai Wuchang occasionally selecting victims to pummel with his power. But they didn't know how to react when Bai Wuchang got manhandled by a duke. The feelings elicited by this were hard to explain. All of the princes and princesses behaved so awkwardly now. After all, King Bai was very affectionate to Bai Wuchang. And he was a very cocky man. Many of the royal children avoided Bai Wuchang. But deep down, they didn't agree that he was the most talented prince. That reputation, combined with his preferential treatment, made them rather jealous. But now, Bai Wuchang had been taught a lesson by a royal guard. Many of the royal children were happy to see him get knocked down a peg or two. So what if he is talented? He is just some dumbass with powerful limbs. He got played by an outsider duke. He is embarrassing, and yet father treats him so well. A prince that saw the video laughed. Miss Mirror watched the video multiple times. She looked more and more shocked by each replay. What she had seen in the grave of soldiers and kings was very different from what she was seeing now. It made Miss Mirror wonder if the Duke in the video was really the same Han Sun she had witnessed in the grave. Inside the grave, Han Sun used only raw power to fight. He was like some muscle-bound ape, hell-bent on crushing all that came at him. But in this fight, Han Sun was sinister and cunning. He played by Wuchang from beginning to end. The frustrated prince was unable to release his own phantom ghost king body power. What a powerful strategy and amazing knife skills. Did he learn those in Sky Palace? But can Sky Palace's knife skills suppress the phantom ghost king body? Miss Mirror stared at the video in deep contemplation. Suddenly, Miss Mirror's gaze stopped at Han Sen's hand. The video wasn't very clear, so Miss Mirror couldn't be exactly sure what she was seeing. Zoom in here and enhance this image. Miss Mirror called out to a couple of techs while pointing at a finger on Han Sen's right hand. The image zoomed in and clarified. There was a silver and emerald ring on Han Sen's finger. The moment Miss Mirror saw the ring, her face whitened. Her jaw clenched as she stared. That calm, attractive expression of hers was gone, and she was starting to look like a completely different person. That ring. Why does he have it? Did he find his grave inside the grave of soldiers and kings? Miss Mirror's expression was unreadable. She stared at the ring on Han Sen's finger for a while before returning to her bedroom. After closing the door behind her, Miss Mirror took out a little box from beneath her bed. She hesitated at first, then slowly opened it. She looked inside it with a conflicted expression. The box held a silver ring. It was set with an emerald that looked like an eye. It was just like the ring Han Sun had dug up from the grave of soldiers and kings. But this one was a size smaller than Han Sen's. Miss Mirror touched the ring in the box, but she didn't take it out. Then she closed the box and put it back. Miss Mirror's expression looked normal again, but something unsettling was still visible in her eyes. Miss Mirror turned around to leave the room, but she hesitated and returned. Her eyes looked so serious as she took the box out again. She picked up the ring, placed it on her finger, and spoke to herself. You might have kept it hidden for many years, but you couldn't hide it forever. You would have never thought that the ring would wind up in the hands of an outsider duke. If you were to learn of this, you'd be rolling in your grave. After that, Miss Mirror laughed. She laughed so hard that her eyes began to glisten with tears. Interesting, so interesting. This Han Sun is most intriguing. Inside an extreme king palace, an elegant woman was watching Bai Wuchang practice knife skills. She frowned and said, Wuchang, I told you that when learning the arts of combat, you need to be more versatile. Depending solely on your phantom ghost king body is a bad plan. I hope you learned a little lesson from this experience. Consider it a warning. You need to learn more from your teacher Ancient Abyss. Bai Wuchang didn't answer or even look at her. He clenched his knife and kept swinging it through the air. He didn't use power though. He looked like a commoner practicing combat. I'm talking to you. Are you listening? A little anger crept into her voice as Bai Wuchang ignored her. Bai Wuchang eventually stopped, looked at the pretty woman, and spoke coldly. I am going to Extreme Mountain. The pretty woman jerked her head up and said, No. No way. That is too risky. I blaze my own trails, Bai Wuchang stated flatly. Then he left the training grounds without hesitation. Wuchang, stop right there. Do you hear me? I will not allow you to go to Extreme Mountain. This is impossible. The pretty woman's face was twisted, and her voice was very sharp. But Bai Wuchang walked away without looking back. He sounded certain when he said, The moment I exit Extreme Mountain is the moment I will go and fight Han Sun again. Chapter 23:12 Universe Geno Lock Han Sen's day hadn't gone well. He beat Bai Wuchang, but the primary root king dragon was taken by another prince. Han Sun wasn't strong enough to beat another king-class prince and 7 half-deified guards. Even if he could have won, Bai Wei didn't want to offend the prince that relinquished the primary root. Bai Wei selected a smaller king dragon to practice with. Han Sun thought doing that was meaningless. If they didn't claim a primary root king dragon, then there wouldn't be much king air for him to absorb. Refining ghost bone power would be faster and more efficient. King Bai had 100 children, but there were only 30 primary root king dragons. Claiming one of them without fighting was very rare. You had to have a lot of luck to secure one peacefully. So Han Sun and Bai Wei spent their days practicing on the smaller king dragons. Fortunately, Han Sun had brought many Duke Xenogeneic genes with him. They were the resources Isha had given to him when he became the holy child of Narrow Moon. Han Sun had brought enough Duke-class Xenogeneic genes to gain 100 points, a total which he quickly reached. Jadeskin Battle Body has reached the required standard for the release of its Geno Lock. Open the Geno Lock. Mutant Blood Battle Body has reached the required standard for the release of its Geno Lock. Open the Geno Lock. The two announcements played back to back in Han Sen's head. He jerked in surprise, for he had no clue what was happening. Han Sen's heart jumped. Jadeskin activated of its own accord, and then his entire body became jade. Some sort of switch inside of his genes had been flipped. It was like all the windows of a sealed room had now been opened, so all the air outside could come in and fill up his body. Endless power came surging into Han Sr. Jadeskin Battle Body has opened its first Geno Lock. Han Sun was shocked. He had opened Geno Locks in the sanctuaries, but he hadn't realized that rebuilding his body and coming to the Geno universe would require him to open those Geno Locks again. But this was a very different process than it had been to open Geno Locks in the sanctuaries. Now, after a Geno Lock was opened, he felt like his body was connected to the planets. By standing on a planet, he could draw on the power of that planet. It reminded him of the description of astral bodies that he had heard previously. After the Geno Lock opened, the 100 Duke genes vanished. The tally went back down to 0. Does this mean that it takes 100 Duke genes to open one Geno Lock? Han Sun regretted the fact that he hadn't brought all of his Xenogeneic genes. But when he thought about it, he realized that bringing them with him wouldn't have been a great idea anyway. He didn't have much storage capacity. If opening a Geno Lock required 100 Duke genes, then opening locks for all 4 of his Geno Arts would require 400 Duke genes. On top of that, there could be more Geno Locks he didn't know about. The Xenogeneic genes he had saved might not be enough to open all of his Geno Locks anyway. But still, Han Sun was feeling very happy. If 100 Duke genes could open one Geno Lock, then the story of genes should follow the same rules. Using 100 genes to open a lock was better than consuming a whole slew of resources for the story of genes to achieve next to nothing. But it was a shame that the story of genes had yet to reach Duke status. Han Sun couldn't yet put his theory to the test. No matter what the case might be, I am going to have to find more Duke Xenogeneic genes. Han Sun didn't want to continue his practice in the King's Garden. After thinking things through, he decided that he needed to go off and hunt down Xenogeneics. My queen, my practice has gone as far as it can go in this place. There is no danger in the King's Garden. So why don't you stay here to practice while I go off and hunt down some Xenogeneics? I'll see if I can achieve a breakthrough. This was the benefit of Han Sun selecting her. If he had become Bai Songlong's guard, he could only have acted on the prince's orders. He could never have said something so bold. Bai Wei thought for a moment and said, "If you want to hunt Xenogeneics, you can go to Knight's Paradise. That place was built for royal guards. There are lots of Xenogeneics there, and only royal guards are permitted entry, so the fighting isn't too bad in there." Killing wasn't allowed in King's Garden. Since she was in mortal danger, Bai Wei didn't see any reason to force Han Sun to stick around. She even walked Han Sun out of King's Garden before going back to practice on her own. She didn't plan on fighting for a primary root king dragon, so she found a weaker king dragon to practice with. That way, no one would bother fighting her. Han Sun wanted to bring Bauer, the little red bird, and the blood Kirin into Knight's Paradise, but he was told that only royal guards could enter. As a result, he had to go by himself. Knight's Paradise was a system. There were no planets capable of supporting ordinary life, but many Xenogeneics still lived on them. Normal creatures relied on airships, unless they were strong enough to live in the inhospitable environment. Although Han Sun had his big white whale, he wasn't going to use it. After he entered Knight's Paradise, he saw that the system was occupied by a lot of galactic shrimp. Han Sun observed the galactic shrimp. They were mostly Duke class, but there were not many of them. Compared to the swarms of galactic shrimp in the systems of chaos, their number seemed almost pathetically small. Han Sen didn't go and kill the galactic shrimps. He flew straight to an orange planet instead. Before Han Sen entered the system, he did some research to ensure that he was well prepared. He knew that the orange planet was full of stone and metal xenogeneics. Their defensive properties were quite impressive, and they were relatively rare. There was a lack of king xenogeneics there though. Ordinary royal guards would have no interest in hunting on that planet. Since Han Sen was unwilling to go to the popular planets to hunt, he had far fewer things to worry about. The popular hunting grounds would have too many king-class guards, and they would pose the biggest threat to him. Knight's Paradise was not King's Garden. Because only royal guards were allowed entry, they could get away with a lot more. Han Sen couldn't predict what might happen if he encountered others, particularly if they proved hostile. Han Sen landed on planet King Kong, and he found himself surrounded by orange rocks as far as the eye could see. As the orange rocks aged, they slowly degraded into orange sand. Because there was no atmosphere to support traditional life forms, the planet had no plant life. And that meant that the temperature of the planet's surface was very low, about 200 kelvins. The gravity was a few times higher than that of most planets, too. Ordinary humans definitely couldn't live there. But that sort of environment wouldn't affect a duke. Han Sen touched down on the orange sand of the desert and started walking. Because the xenogeneics were hidden in caves or beneath the dunes, he would have trouble spotting them if he flew. Because of this, he settled on walking. Planet King Kong had many solo xenogeneics. They rarely operated in groups, which was one of the reasons why the other guards didn't like going there. If the king guards wanted many low-class xenogeneic genes, it would take a long time to collect them, because of the independence of the xenogeneics. Han Sen kept walking, and walking until he saw the sand rise around him. Something that was 3 meters long suddenly emerged from the sand. Chapter 23:13 Planet King Kong. Han Sen's eyes flashed like lightning as he turned to face the thing coming out of the sand. It was a humanoid form made of rock. It rose and immediately smashed a fist of stone down toward Han Sen. Han Sen quickly retreated, so that the rockman's fist hit the sand. The sand shot out in a miniature shockwave around the creature's fist. Stone was clearly its element, so the creature would have difficulty casting power outside of its body. However, the creature was quite adept at using its power to reinforce itself, so its physical strength was extremely impressive. As the rockman swung at him again, Han Sen deployed his jadeskin battle body. Then, he threw a punch to meet the rockman's own. Pang! Han Sen's jade fist came against the rockman's stony knuckles, which released the sharp cracking noise of stone hitting stone. The rockman's giant fist and arm were shattered by Han Sen's punch, scattering broken chunks of rock across the sand around them. Han Sen quickly followed up his punch, hitting the rockman repeatedly. After a few blows, the rockman's body had become nothing but rubble on the dunes. Xenogeneic Duke hunted. Rock Demon, Xenogeneic gene found. Han Sen didn't obtain a new beast soul, but that didn't bother him. He rummaged through the rubble of his fallen foe until he unearthed a mud-colored crystal. Xenogeneic Duke Rock Demon gene obtained. Han Sen picked up the crystal and resumed walking through the desert. Now that Jade Skin had its first gene lock open, he could borrow power from the planet itself. The ability was proving to be quite useful. He stood on planet King Kong and recovered the energy he had spent when he took down the rock demon. Han Sen walked 100 miles, and during that entire time, he only encountered 2 rock demons. Xenogeneics were annoyingly rare on the planet, but because of that, there was little in the way of risk. It would just take longer for Han Sen to collect what he needed. Han Sen could fly very quickly, so he took to the air to speed things up a bit. He traveled across the desert until he saw a black fog choking an area in front of him. Han Sen thought it might be a sandstorm or a gathering of dark clouds, but there was something about it that didn't feel right. The planet's atmosphere was too thin to form real clouds or sandstorms. The black fog came closer, and Han Sen realized that instead of being composed of sand, it was actually a vast cloud of stoneflies. The stoneflies looked almost exactly like ordinary flies, but their bodies were composed of black stone. They were a common low-level xenogeniac that was commonly known to reside on planet King Kong. They were the only xenogeniacs on the planet that could attack in a group. Dong 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 dong. Killing them was pointless. Most of the stoneflies were barons, and it was very rare to find one that was even a viscount. None of the royal guards cared about stonefly xenogeniac genes. As the stoneflies came closer, Han Sen heard a weird noise coming from their midst. It sounded as if there was something larger hovering in the middle of the dark cyclone of insects. There were so many of the stoneflies that they hung over the ground like a black cloud. As a result, Han Sen couldn't see what lay within. This is a truly amazing number of stoneflies. It isn't common to see this many of them, according to the chronicled history of planet King Kong. Why are they here? What drew them here? Han Sen wondered. Han Sen was wearing his galactic lobster armor, which would protect him from even king-class creatures. Han Sen wasn't worried about the insects in front of him, so he walked right into the hordes of stoneflies. He wanted to see what he would find in the middle. Even if there was a king-class xenogeniac, Han Sen would be able to battle it within the dark cloud. If he could kill a king-class xenogeniac, its xenogeniac gene would be a great reward for him, as well. The number of stoneflies within the swarm was truly mind-boggling. Han Sen strode through the swarm, and it sounded like a rainstorm as the stoneflies pelted his armor. The stoneflies weren't trying to attack him though. There were simply so many of them that they flew into Han Sen's armor by mistake. Han Sen made his way through the stoneflies, and after a while, he saw a blurry shadow in front of him. The closer he got to the shadow, the more stoneflies there were. The shadow soon resolved into a beast with 4 legs. It looked kind of like a tiger or a lion, but that shadow was so obscured by the stoneflies that Han Sen couldn't see even an inch of its skin. Other than a rough outline, the creature's form was hidden. Han Sen could only tell that it was 20 meters tall and 30 meters long. The xenogeniac was now approaching under the blanketing stoneflies. The stoneflies raced furiously around it. The xenogeniac passed close by Han Sen, but it continued to walk without showing any sign of wanting to attack him. Han Sen frowned. He moved his leg, and a petrify shockwave spread out around him. Although stone element xenogeniacs had a strong resistance to the powers of petrification, the stoneflies were simply too low level to withstand his attack. Han Sen's petrify shockwave spread out, petrifying many of the stoneflies on contact. They fell down from the sky. The stoneflies upon the xenogeniac also became petrified, and they began to fall to the ground one by one. As that creature continued to walk, its real face became visible. It was a wolf made of blue metal, but for some reason, it had been sorely injured. Blood coated the creature's entire body. The stoneflies had swarmed around the wolf, trying to dine on the blue blood that was oozing freely out of its body. Blurg! The blue metal wolf suddenly coughed twice. It continued to hack as it moved forward, strings of blood hanging from its mouth. Many of the stoneflies buzzed down around its head, clearly drawn by the blue blood that was now staining the sand. Han Sen sent out another wave of petrification, but the hordes of stoneflies stretched far beyond the reach of the attack. Seconds later, they had descended to cover up the blue metal wolf's body once more. The blue metal wolf barely seemed to notice the stoneflies. It only continued to walk without rest. Every step it took left a giant paw print in the sand. I am way too lucky. I've met an injured king-class xenogeniac. It might even be half deified. Han Sen was so happy. The blue metal wolf looked badly wounded, and Han Sen believed that it was weak enough to be killed easily. He drew out his Thunder God Spike and Ghost Teeth knife. He was going to strike at the injured metal wolf. Just as Han Sen was about to attack, he heard a scream from the sky. That scary scream was like a shockwave spreading out from some point above him. Countless stoneflies exploded under the pressure of that fierce scream. In moments, the hordes of insects that had covered the entire sky were reduced to nothing but a whiff of dust. Han Sen's eyes widened. A stone dragon soared across the sky, flapping its wings. It swooped down from the sky, extending sharp claws toward the injured metal wolf. The stone dragon's body looked like black jade. Its wings cut the air like sharp stone blades, and they glittered with a fractalic light. It was a strange sight. A king-class stone xenogeniac? Han Sun frowned as he gripped his weapons tighter. He stared at the giant metal wolf and readied himself to fight. Trying to steal stuff from me, huh? I'll tell you right now that you don't have what it takes. Chapter 23:14 Strange Metal Wolf. The stone dragon dove toward the blue metal wolf's head. But Han Sun steadied his weapons and remained motionless. Even a skinny camel was still bigger than a horse. So while the blue metal wolf had sustained terrible injuries, it still had plenty of strength. It wouldn't go down quickly. Therefore, Han Sun planned to let the stone dragon and the metal wolf duke it out for a while before initiating a strike of his own. The stone dragon landed. Its area-off effect covered the blue metal wolf, and stone markings appeared across the wolf's body. The stone dragon apparently had a petrifying ability, and judging by its effects, the skill was far stronger than the stone cow's petrification. The blue metal wolf hadn't reacted to Han Sun's petrifying shockwave, but the stone dragon's attack had scrawled stony markings across the wolf's body. The attack also seemed to sink deeper into the wolf's wounds, as stone started to build up and solidify around the creature's injuries. The stone dragon's talons reached out to seize the wolf's neck. The blue metal wolf had been keeping its head low. It didn't use a king-class area-off effect of its own, but when the stone dragon's talons closed in, the wolf raised its head. The stone dragon's talons slammed into the wolf's face, but the blue metal creature had no reaction. The dragon's talons were unable to pierce the wolf's skin. Catcha! The blue metal wolf bit into the stone dragon's wings with enough force to rip them right off. Han Sun watched in shock as the stone dragon screamed. The blue metal wolf didn't make a sound. It simply went wild with its claws and fangs. A moment later, the king-class stone dragon was torn open by the blue metal wolf. King-class blood sprayed everywhere. Once the stone dragon was ripped open, the blue metal wolf stopped, and its stone markings faded. The powers of the stone dragon no longer seemed to have an effect on the wolf. The metal wolf tore further into the dragon's body, finding and ripping out the dragon's petrifying spine. Han Sun figured it was the dragon's xenogeniac gene. The beast chewed it a little, then swallowed it with a single gulp. Without sparing the body of the stone dragon a second glance, the wolf walked away. Han Sun was stunned. The blue metal wolf hadn't even used a king-class area-off effect, and it had still slain the king-class stone dragon with ease. The strength it possessed was both terrifying and disconcerting. Han Sun had initially wanted to take advantage of the wolf's injured state, but after seeing the ferocity of the beast, he gave up on the idea. This guy must be a mutant king-class xenogeniac, Han Sun thought. But Han Sun didn't understand. The blue metal wolf was very strong, and it had displayed its strength during its brief battle with the stone dragon. The king-class stone dragon had been unable to puncture the metal body of the wolf, and after being petrified, the wolf had been able to recover. That meant it possessed impressive healing powers. That was a scary xenogeniac by any metric. It had wounds that it couldn't heal though. It continued to bleed, which made Han Sun wonder how it had ended up in such a state. According to the information he was able to gather on Knight's Paradise, deified creatures did exist there. But it was unheard of for them to reside on planet King Kong. Is planet King Kong home to deified xenogeniacs that have yet to be discovered? Han Sun was shocked. He could probably handle himself against king-class xenogeniacs, but it would be impossible for him to go up against a deified being. Seeing the blue metal wolf proceed to travel deeper into the desert, Han Sun hesitated for a moment. Ultimately, he decided to follow the blue metal wolf. He wanted to see where the wolf was going. Han Sun thought that if the blue metal wolf was truly dying, he might still have a chance to claim its spoils once it gave up the ghost. The blue metal wolf kept walking through the desert. It moved slowly despite its strength, which was something that Han Sun wouldn't underestimate now that he had seen the beast in action. If it wanted to move faster, it certainly could. Wherever the blue metal wolf went, every xenogeniac other than the stoneflies fled. Nothing wanted to be anywhere near the giant wolf. The stoneflies stayed close, however. They gathered near the blue metal wolf and swarmed it, covering its wounds and drinking its blood. The blue metal wolf didn't plan on killing them. It continued on its way, proceeding deep into the far reaches of the desert. Han Sen followed it for 70 to 80 universal hours. Eventually, the blue metal wolf came to a stop. The valley in front of them was grand but also in disarray, and no water coursed through its stone. Instead, a flow of lava coursed through the valley. The blue metal wolf observed the stream of lava for a moment, then leaped right into the lava. Splash! The blue metal wolf jumped into the lava, sending out waves that were dozens of meters high. The lava splashed across the shores of the stream, and it released plumes of black smoke and fire as it landed. Han Sen flew slowly around the large valley. After the blue metal wolf jumped into the lava, it quickly disappeared. It was as if the beast had drowned, for he could no longer see it. Weird. The blue metal wolf didn't look like it was attuned to the element of fire. There is no way that the lava is his natural home. But if not, then what would bring him here? Perhaps the creature really did think that it was dying, so it wanted to end things here, by jumping into the lava, to prevent others from eating its remains? That can't be right. There must be xenogenics in the lava. The wolf can't keep its body in the lava forever. Han Sen thought this was very weird. Han Sen looked around, and he eventually saw that the lava was home to stony-looking snakes. They didn't go close to where the blue metal wolf had jumped in though. This didn't really have anything to do with Han Sen, but he was simply curious. His desire to figure out what was going on was like an itch that he couldn't scratch. He didn't want to just leave. Han Sen killed a xenogenic nearby, while waiting for the blue metal wolf to re-emerge. He didn't stray too far from where the wolf had disappeared. Almost 4 days went by, and the lava stream stayed quiet. It made Han Sen feel depressed. Han Sen wanted to dive into the lava and take a closer look, but he couldn't make up his mind. Many xenogenics lived in that land of lava, but none of them dared to go to that one specific area. Perhaps they were scared of the blue metal wolf, or maybe something even stranger was down there. Xenogenic marquise hunted. Rock snake, xenogenic gene found. Han Sen killed a rock snake, as there weren't many other xenogenics around. This was the last xenogenic he could find to kill, and it was only a marquise. Han Sen gritted his teeth and went back to the zone of lava. He surmised that waiting there was a waste of time, so he now had to choose between two options. He could leave that place and continue hunting, or he could enter the lava and take a look. Because of his curiosity, Han Sen went with the second option. He donned his galactic lobster armor and activated his Dongxian aura, then dunked his head into the lava. Chapter 23:15 Meeting an old friend. The melting point of planet King Kong's stone was very high, so the lava itself was incredibly hot. Han Sen was wearing his galactic lobster armor and had his jade skin firing on all cylinders. But even so, he still felt like his skin was being singed. Fortunately, he could withstand the heat. With hesitating, he dove deep into the lava. The lava wasn't transparent like water, so his eyes were useless once he was under the surface. Instead, he had to use his Dongxian aura to examine his surroundings. The stream of lava was far vaster than he had expected from the surface. After swimming down for a while, Han Sen still hadn't located the injured blue metal wolf. He couldn't see the far reaches of the lava either. It was like he was lost in the middle of an endless sea. Han Sen frowned, but after a minute, the Dongxian aura detected a creature swimming through the lava nearby. No, it wasn't just one. Han Sen quickly realized that there were many xenogenics swimming through the lava. He was surrounded by rock dragons that were at least 100 meters long. They were all playing together in the lava. Han Sen could feel their presences in frightening detail. They were all king class, at least, and there were many of them. Han Sen sensed at least a dozen. Fortunately, the rock dragons didn't seem interested in Han Senator. Perhaps he was too small, and he was thus unable to snare their attention. 1,000-meter-long rock dragon swam smoothly past Han Sen, and he decided to jump onto that stone body, like a little lizard. He latched onto the rock dragon's skin and let it carry him forward. In that endless lava sea, finding an injured blue metal wolf no longer seemed like a realistic goal. However, if the rock dragon horde wasn't hostile, then using a rock dragon to look around seemed like a good idea. The rock dragon swam through the lava for a while, and eventually it dove deeper into the sea of lava. The temperature rose around them, and Han's son felt as if his skin was burning. Fortunately, the scales of the rock dragon were cool. They weren't changing in accordance with the temperature of the lava, and pressing himself against them made Han's son feel a whole lot better. There were many xenogeneics in that lava sea. They were all either fire or rock elementals, but when they encountered the dragon horde, they all moved aside. None of the creatures wanted to start a fight with the dragons. But still, there seemed to be no sign of the blue metal wolf anywhere. It made Han's son wonder, this place isn't suitable for the blue metal wolf. Why would he come here? As Han's son mulled over the question, he suddenly felt a wave of pressure sweep over him. And then, that burning sensation quickly disappeared. Han's son noticed that all the lava was gone. He opened his eyes and what he saw shocked him. The burning lava was being held aloft by some invisible power. It created a sky of lava, and below the lava sky was a dreamy-looking island. There were pools, mountains, flowers, and trees there. White clouds hung all around it. It looked like a slice of heaven. A lake lay in the middle of that island, steaming like a giant hot spring. The blue metal wolf was having a bath inside the lake. It looked very tired, as if coming to the island had been a much-needed vacation. The rock dragons were now flying around the island. They wanted to enter the lake as well, but they appeared to be too afraid. Instead, they kept roaring at the metal wolf. The blue metal wolf continued its bath contentedly, ignoring the noisy dragons. Han's son could see that the wounds of the blue metal wolf were almost healed. After the days it had spent in the lake, it seemed almost completely restored to health. Can the water of that lake heal things? Han's son looked at that lake. The lake looked very clear, and he could see the spring water bubbling up at its center. The steamy air was rising, but he couldn't detect anything particularly special about it. The lake was surrounded by mountains, trees, and vines. Some flowers were opening between the clouds. If it wasn't for the lava sky, it would have looked like some sort of holiday resort. Perhaps the rock dragons finally succeeded in annoying the wolf, because the creature stood up from the lake and roared back at them. The rock dragons looked all shocked, and they surged back up toward the lava sky. They left the weird island below the lava. As Han's son considered the island, he concluded that the island might have been where the rock dragons lived. The blue metal wolf seemed to have taken it away from them. Perhaps that was why they were forced to leave. And the blue metal wolf might have just been using the lake on the island to heal itself. Han's son was disappointed. The blue metal wolf's wounds had almost healed. Even the king-class rock dragons were now scared of the beast, so Han's son stood no chance. Han's son released his hold on the rock dragon's body and dived out of the lava sea. He wanted to return to the valley, so he could go back to slaying xenogeneics. Han's son followed the winding path of the valley. After walking 1,000 miles, he found a few more rock demons. He killed them and obtained their xenogeneic genes, but he still hadn't received one of their beast souls. Suddenly, he saw a shadow drop from the sky. It broke the atmosphere. Heading straight for Han's senator. Upon seeing the shadow, Hansen's face paled. He turned around with the intent to leave immediately, but that shadow was far too quick. It landed directly in front of Han's son to bar his way. What? You are leaving so soon after seeing me? Do you not like me? That shadow was a beautiful female guard. She smiled at Han Senior Guard Red Sleeve. I have only met you once. I simply didn't recognize you. How could I possibly not like you? I'm just in a hurry to hunt xenogeneics. If there is nothing else you desire, then I must go. Han's son turned around and started to leave. Red Sleeve smiled and said, My good little brother, in the king's garden. I believe you recognized your big sister, correct? Why would you say that? Hansen shivered and forced a wry smile. He knew he couldn't hide anymore. He turned around to face Red Sleeve, and her body had already changed. She had snow-white ears and a fox's tail. Her face had transformed into one that Hansen knew very well. It was Fox Queen. I see that my sister's face looks the same as ever. You still look so pretty. I am so happy to see you. Han's son smiled, but his mind was in a rush about how to escape. Fox Queen was bold enough to disguise herself as one of the Extreme King and get close to Prince 14 in the process. She must have planned something big. Now that Han's son had learned that she was among them, there was no way she would be willing to leave him alive. Han's son hadn't shown that he recognized her before, hoping that she wouldn't realize he had recognized her. He thought it would take a while for her to find out that he had discovered her secret, and so he hadn't expected her to come for him so soon. Fox Queen's beautiful face darkened. Are you mocking me by suggesting that I lost to the hands of your teacher? You are looking into my words too deeply, sister. Han's son laughed. Fox Queen's expression was like ice, and she said, if I hadn't been suppressed for so long that my talents stagnated, your teacher wouldn't have been able to defeat me. When I regain my strength, I am going to break her. Clearly, Fox Queen still harbored much contempt for Isha due to her defeat. She seemed to care about her loss quite a lot. If you're still recovering, why have you come here to the Extreme King? Han's son asked with a grin. He wanted to get whatever information he could from her. Fox Queen gave him a beatific smile. Don't worry, I'm not here to cause you trouble. I am actually hoping to work with you. You want to cooperate? Why? Han's son looked at Fox Queen with confusion. So we can steal treasure, of course. If there wasn't treasure up for grabs, why would I be here with the Extreme King? Fox Queen said. Stepping closer to Han's senator, she reached out to touch Han's son on the cheek, but he leapt 50 meters away like a rabbit. He looked very alert. That's not very courageous of you. Do not worry, I need your help. I don't intend to do anything bad to you. Fox Queen assured him with a chuckle. Han's son coldly said, I am just a small-time duke. I don't think I will be able to help you. Fox Queen had been bold to sneak into the Extreme King. Whatever she wanted to steal had to be important. If someone made the Extreme King angry, the elite race would probably destroy that person's friends and family. Even if Han's son wasn't afraid, he had to think about his family and friends on planet Eclipse. Plus, evil women like Fox Queen were completely untrustworthy. She would happily betray anyone she wanted to. You will help me. I am merely here to say hello, so that you will be prepared, Fox Queen said. Her body returned to her guise of red sleeve. She waved at Han's son and went on to say, I'm leaving now. It would be bad if someone saw you with me. I will see you later, my good brother. After that, Fox Queen put her fingers to her sexy red lips. She blew Han's son a kiss and then flew away. Han's son frowned. Fox Queen had come there to see him and reveal her true self. She was clearly there to warn him about exposing her true identity. How dare she threaten me? It's not like she can blackmail me or anything, but she seems too confident. She must have her reasons. She couldn't be bluffing me, could she? Han's son couldn't figure out her current game. He wondered what had really compelled her to expose her true self to him there. Han's son put away thoughts of Fox Queen and got back to hunting down Xenogeneics. His pursuit of Xenogeneics eventually brought him to an orange mountain. When he landed, a wall began to shake next to him. A creature made of black metal emerged. It looked like a doll, and it walked right out of the wall. Its body moved with machine-like clumsiness as it approached Han Sr., a Duke-class metal doll? Han's son grinned. Metal dolls were Planet King Kong's special type of Xenogeneic. They were very rare, and it was uncommon to see one away from the metal mines. The metal doll's Xenogeneic gene was an extremely rare ingredient of Xenogeneic treasure. It was a Duke-class item, but it was a valued component for the creation of King-class Xenogeneic treasures. The body of a metal doll was a good Xenogeneic treasure ingredient as well. Its entire body was valuable. Han's son needed Xenogeneic genes, and a metal doll was worth a dozen ordinary Duke Xenogeneic genes. The creature's body looked clumsy, and it suddenly started moving. Its fist flashed toward Han's son like lightning. The thing might have looked awkward, but it moved with incredible speed. An ordinary person couldn't have reacted to its attack in time, but Han's son's reaction times were the best of the best. He jumped up and dodged the metal doll's swift punch. Then he struck back with his ghost teeth knife and cut the metal doll's brain in half. Xenogeneic Duke hunted. Metal doll. Xenogeneic gene found. Obtained metal doll beast soul. It gave me a beast soul? I wonder what type of beast soul it is. Han's son was delighted. He checked out the beast soul inside his sea of soul. Duke Beast's Soul Metal Doll. Halo type. Before Han Sun could try out the beast's soul, a loud noise came from overhead. Someone landed right next to Han. Senator Han Sun turned to take a look at the man next to him. His presence was intimidating, and he was definitely king class. Leave the item there, and I will permit you to go, the king class guard said coldly. Then he moved to pick up the remains of the metal doll. That is my kill. Han Sun stepped onto the metal doll, knocking it from the other guard's grip. The metal doll shook beneath Han Sun's legs. It didn't go to the king class guard. The king class guard chuckled icily. You are allowed to kill and rob whoever you want in Knight's Paradise. I'm only taking the prey and not your life in respect for Queen Bai Wei. If you meant nothing to her, I would have already killed you for what you just said. I'm not superstitious. You said I would have been killed. I would like to see if that is true, Han Sun stated flatly, still standing on the body of the metal doll. King Bai allowed his children and grandchildren to fight, but he made sure there were rules in place to keep them from killing each other. They didn't have to worry about dying. As long as King Bai lived, no royal child would kill their peers. But the lives of the children's royal guards were nowhere near as important. Royal guards were often killed in the squabbles between royal children. Knight's Paradise was something of a dangerous area. The guards killed xenogenics there, and also competed against other guards. It wasn't like the King's Garden, where killing was forbidden. This would be an easy place to get away with murder. The king-class guard was totally correct. He would offend Bai Wei if he killed Han Sun there, but no one would hold him personally responsible. He'd still be free. Han Sun didn't want to back off though. He had come to the Extreme King to claim resources, and he would not give up easily. If you want to die, then don't take it out on me for obliging you, the king-class guard growled. Then he cast a green area-off effect, which covered a distance of a few thousand meters. Inside the attack's perimeter, Han Sun now felt as if he was in water. The stifling power was so strong that he couldn't move freely. Clearly, the AoE had a water element that lowered Han Sun's mobility. Han Sun drew his ghost teeth knife, as he felt a chain of water wrap around him. It bound him tightly, and his arms were completely restrained. The king-class guard didn't move to attack. He just allowed his AoE to bring Han Sun closer. Han Sun's limbs were outstretched as he was brought to float before the king guard. You think beating Prince Wuchang makes you a badass? You're naive. Dukes are still dukes. The gulf of power between a duke and king is the same societal difference that separates royalty and slaves. It is the difference between the sky and the ground. It is the difference that separates the stars and the moon, the king-class guard said. He reached for Han Sun's ghost teeth knife. He intended to use Han Sun's own blade to kill him. When the king-class guard reached for ghost teeth knife's handle, Han Sun cast jade skin and mutant blood at the same time. His flesh became jade, and his crystal blood melted. It was like boiling lava now, surging throughout Han Sun's body. The water that restricted Han Sun's body thinned. It didn't snap, but it was stretched. It couldn't stop what Han Sun was doing. The monarchy can be overthrown. The skies and the ground can be reversed. The stars can be moved. Day and night can be swapped. Everything is in my hands. Han Sun's voice was as cold as steel. He grabbed Ghost Teeth knife and swiped it at the king-class guard. The teeth power became a roaring dark purple demon. It was going to eat the man. You are just a duke. How do you know how thick the sky is? Do you think the ground can be shaken? How bright are the stars and the moons, do you think? The king-class knight didn't move. Instead, he threw a punch against Han Sun's knife air. The green punch was like water. The teeth power's demon knife air hit the water and created a ripple. It was just a swirl, like a drop of water into the sea, becoming one with the rest. The king-class guard came punching at Han Sun with the force of a tsunami. Han Sun was like a boat, rocking around on the crazy waves of the tumultuous sea, caught by powers that could overthrow and drown him any second. Dong! Suddenly, Han Sun's left hand hit the blood scorpion jade drum that was still tied to his waist. That sound was like the toxic stinger of a scorpion, and it was thrusting at the king-class guard's head. The guard's face changed. His green light was still bright and powerful, but it was too late for him to do anything about Han Sun's attack. The acoustics of the drum went straight into his head. Arg! The king guard screamed, and his AoE was disrupted. Han Sen pulled out the Thunder God spike, which was slung around his back. He used the lightning power to needle the king-class guard, who was still screaming from the drum's attack. But Han Sen could feel that the Thunder God spike was somewhat restricted. It was like he was trying to move it through the deep sea, and it was forced to slowly part the water as it slid forward. Even bullets would be slowed by that stopping power. Damn it! The AoE is affecting me too much, Han Sen thought in frustration. Before the Thunder God spike struck the guard's body, the man clutched his head and retreated. He was able to avoid Han Sen's attack. I clearly underestimated you. The king guard opened his hand, and a lance appeared in its grip. Lots of lance waves came at Han. Senator Han Sen was still restricted by the guard's area of effect. His movement was slowed, and he was unable to dodge. He lifted the Thunder God spike and tried to use it to repel the king guard's lance. He also pounded the Blood Scorpion Jade drum again. Dong! The drum was like thunder, and the king guard had to use his power to protect himself. He was able to block the Blood Scorpion Jade drum's attack. The Thunder God spike in Han Sen's hand collided with the lance. The silver lightning and the green light came against each other, but the lightning wasn't repelled. It struck the lance. There was a loud scream as the king guard was electrified. He almost dropped the lance in his hand, but he wasn't paralyzed for long, and he soon recovered. Han Sen had wanted to spike him while he was paralyzed, but he couldn't. The king-class guard was shocked by Han Sen's attacks. It was frightening that a duke, even when he was submerged in a king-class area of effect, could be so threatening. Han Sen was worried. The king guard was clearly stronger than Night River King had been. The guard had struck twice, but he hadn't hit Han Sen yet. The king-class guard wasn't looking at Han Sen with disdain. His eyes looked sharp, and his lance was like a dragon that was pointing at Han Senator. He wasn't willing to let Han Sen touch him with the Thunder God spike. Han Sen's body was still bound by the AoE, and the guard was now being careful. This was going to be a dirty fight. The guard was avoiding the Blood Scorpion Jade drum and Thunder God spike. He was wary of exposing himself to either weapon, and that was how Han Sen maintained their impasse. The king guard's lance kept poking around Han Sen's defenses, but he couldn't get past Han Sen's Thunder God spike. He was shocked by this, and he thought, this duke is still defending himself, despite being dead center in my AoE attack? This guy really is something special. It is no wonder he was able to defeat Prince Bai Wuchang. Han Sen's power kept exploding out of him. He could barely hold off the AoE's restrictive properties, and doing so was requiring a great deal of energy. And if he ended up exhausting himself, beating his foe would be impossible. Han Sen found a chance. He jumped up and flapped his wings, intending to teleport out of the king's area of effect. But the teleportation capabilities of the wings were too limited. He could only go 1 mile at a time, which wasn't nearly enough to separate himself from the king's area of effect. And now the king guard was coming for him. Inside the area of effect, Han Sen couldn't compete with his opponent's speed. He is a water element king. Being in a high-temperature place will be a disadvantage for him. Han Sen quickly turned and headed for the enormous lava valley. Pang! Beneath the restrictions of that king area of effect, Han Sen's movements were slow. The king-class guard managed to land a blow on his shoulder, and he felt water thrust into his wound. Han Sen gritted his teeth and then jumped into the lava. The king-class guard laughed darkly. I thought you were worthy of respect. I didn't expect you to do something so foolish. Water is not a cold element. Do you really think fire will work well against water? I will show you how scary water can be when up against a fire element. After that, the king guard leaped into the lava without hesitation. The king-class guard traveled through the lava quickly, and Han Sen couldn't find a way to escape his area of effect. The scariest thing was the way that the water attack was heated up by the lava. The water orb became a region of scalding steam. Its binding powers grew stronger, and it seemed as if it was going to melt Han Sen's galactic lobster armor. Han Sen knew that he had shot himself in the foot. That king guard was aligned with the element of water, but that didn't imply affiliation with cold and in-force powers. The fire element was known to restrict the water element, but under the right conditions, they could actually make each other more dangerous. Like a steam machine, with the aid of fire, water could be turned into high-pressure steam. Then it could apply a force of pressure. The guard attacking Han Sen obviously had that skill and power. The lava sea's temperature increased the power of the water AoE, making Han Sen's situation all the direr. The water around Han Sen heated up and turned into high-pressure steam, restricting Han Sen's body all the more. And the heat was growing unbearable. It was like he had been thrown into a super high-pressure cauldron. If Han Sen hadn't been running his powerful Jade Skin Geno art, he would have been easily cooked by the King's Arioff effect. These kings are getting harder and harder to deal with, Han Sen whined in his heart. But he remained focused on the fight, using whatever powers he had at his disposal. The Fire Crow Beast soul from the Systems of Chaos made a Fire Halo AoE that would give Han Sen fire powers. It also increased his resistance to the fire element. It was exactly the effect that Han Sen wanted, but regrettably, the Beast Soul was only Marquis class. The effect wasn't very pronounced, but it made him feel a little bit better. He summoned the Metal Doll Beast Soul next. Although he didn't know what it was for, he was too desperate to worry about it. If it might help, it was being spawned. Han Sen had given the Demon Bug King by Semace to Han Yin and the others, in case they got into trouble. The bird's nest had been absorbed by the little red bird. Right now, Han Sen had no better defensive alternatives. The metal doll was deployed, and a black halo that resembled teeth marks appeared around Han Sen's feet. When the wheel-like halo spun, Han Sen's body was covered in black metal. Han Sen felt as if his power had been given a boost, and his power element was now indestructible. There was a certain sharpness to all of his movements. When he swung his weapon, the steam binding him became much easier to tear through. Does the metal doll halo increase the power and sharpness of the user? Han Sen didn't have the time to think it through. He gritted his teeth and dove deep into the lava sea. Han Sen had no way to return to the surface. He planned to head for the island that resided below the lava and see if he could find the group of rock dragons and that blue metal wolf. If he could manipulate them into entering the fight, he might have a chance of fighting back. Han Sen waved his Thunder God Spike to leave a wake of lightning behind him, but the lightning was useless inside that Arioff effect. The King-class guard used his power to destroy the attack. It achieved naught. Pang! A blow landed on Han Sen's body. Although the damage wasn't critical, streams of water were now flowing into his body and thumping in his vessels. Han Sen cast Spell's Eternity solidifying power. His blood solidified around the water in his body, prohibiting that power from spreading through his body. Han Sen incurred a few similar wounds, but they didn't strike any vital places. The King-class guard was shocked. Although he hadn't yet landed a killing blow on Han Sen, he had been making use of a toxic Geno art. Anyone who was struck by it would be lucky if they were only paralyzed. The poison could be deadly to King-class opponents, yet a mere Duke was repelling it. And Han Sen was still able to fight him. He didn't look to be affected by the toxins, and that confused the guard. Han Sen frowned. He was so close to the island now, but he didn't see any rock dragons. As he was thinking, a sense of lightness passed over Han Sen's body. He dropped out of the lava, entering that familiar space below. The King-class guard entered right behind him. He saw the lava sky above, and the island down below. He was shocked at the sight and he murmured, "What? The center of planet King Kong has a place like this?" Han Sen looked over the lake. He couldn't see the blue metal wolf that was taking a bath anymore either. And not a single rock dragon circled overhead. He felt sick, and he thought to himself, "Why am I so unlucky? None of them are here." Han Sen teleported again, drawing closer to the lake. He waved his Thunder God Spike to deflect the King-class guard's attack, and used his Dongxian aura to scan around like mad. Suddenly, Han Sen noticed something blue below the surface of the lake. A relieved smile spread over his face. The blue metal wolf was merely sleeping underwater. Without hesitation, Han Sen let himself get hit by one of the guard's strikes. The blow sent him shooting down into the water like an arrow, and he swam straight to the blue metal wolf. The king guard followed. Because planet King Kong had no deified xenogeneics, he didn't think he had anything to be afraid of. But when he entered the water, he woke up the sleeping blue metal wolf. When Han's son entered the water, he was careful to hide his presence. He slipped lightly under the surface, like a gracefully diving acrobat. Han's son even tried to suppress the splash to avoid creating a startling movement. But the King-class guard didn't care. He brought his AoE with him, blanketing half of the lake. The attack also fell over the blue metal wolf. The sleeping wolf woke up in a fury. It stood up, its metallic fur standing on end. Then it howled. The lake exploded like a freshwater spring as the howl blasted away the water. Han's son curled up in fetal position, holding his weapon in front to protect himself. Even so, the shockwave was strong enough to blast him away with the rest of the lake water. Luckily, he was still wearing his galactic lobster armor. It was a king-class set of armor. If he hadn't been wearing it, the power unleashed by the blue metal wolf would have shattered every bone in his body. What amazing power! What is the level of this blue metal wolf? Han's son wondered. On the other side, the king guard now looked horrified. He was frozen in the air, unmoving. The blue metal wolf was now standing in the dry lake bed, and its blue wolf eyes were peering right at him. The guard felt like he was being watched by the Grim Reaper himself, and his nerves were as tight as bowstrings. His body was shivering, and the only thing he wanted was to escape. But he didn't dare try. He was sure that if he turned around, the blue metal wolf would leap after him. The beast would chew him up and crunch his bones. The lake water rained down softly. The man and the wolf looked at each other, and the king-class guard's forehead was covered in sweat. The guard's water AoE didn't give him any feeling of security. As those blue wolf eyes stared at him, cold sweat snaked its way down the king's forehead and across his face. "Oa!" Then the blue metal wolf howled again. Its strong limbs unleashed a grand amount of power. The water AoE was strengthened by the falling lake water. But even so, it wasn't enough to trouble the blue metal wolf. The blue metal wolf's body blurred, and then it was opening its mouth and biting into the guard's body. Pang! The wolf's teeth sank into the king's body, and at that moment, he exploded like water. His armor and weaponry were chewed up and swallowed. The body itself had turned into water, however, and that water surged out of the wolf's mouth and transformed back into a man that was headed for the lava sky. He's one of the Extreme King. That must be his water element king body. Han's son watched the king-class guard become a waterman, then head for the lava sky. Han's son wasn't going to let him run off, and so he stopped the man and used the Thunder God spike to pierce his body. "I am Prince 16. Get out of my way," the king shouted. He wasn't afraid of Han's son, though. He was just afraid of that blue metal wolf. It had eaten his armor and lance, and now it was coming for him with hungry eyes. If he was stopped by Han's son, the blue metal wolf would be able to attack him once more. He knew that the wolf had to be some sort of deified being. He wouldn't be able to win in a fight against it. His original Water King body would be useless against a deified enemy. He had been incredibly fortunate to escape the first time. "And I'm your daddy, King Bai." Han's son didn't believe him, and so he pounded the blood scorpion jade drum and thrust the Thunder God spike towards the man. He wanted to stop the king guard at all costs. The king guard saw the blue metal wolf approaching him. He didn't have time to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and ran into Han's son's Thunder God spike without taking the time to evade. Very good. Han's son had no intention of going easy on him. The Thunder God spike perforated the guard's original Water King body. The Thunder God spike couldn't be withstood by someone who was half deified. So Han's son didn't believe a king body could overcome the lightning's wrath. The Thunder God spike pierced into that watery body, its silvery lightning flashing all throughout the liquid. The water body started to brighten, but the electrified water body didn't fall back toward the wolf. Han's son heard the king scream, coming straight toward Han's senator. He then managed to hit Han's senator. The water body smacked Han's son, then shattered. The guard was all over Han's senior arc. Han's son shouted. The lightning in the water shot into him, so he was also electrified. His hair was blasted straight, and he almost fell out of the sky. The blue metal wolf down below howled at the pair. It looked ready to unleash another attack. Han Sen fought off the numbness that was taking over his body, flapped his wings, and returned to the lava. After Han Sen teleported back to the lava and quickly began swimming upwards, he felt as if something was wrong with him. The king-class guard had become water and splashed across him, and due to this, he had been electrified. The water was gone, but it felt as if it was now inside his body. Han Sen could clearly feel a strange, watery power inside him. It was sinking into his body and trying to merge with his cells. "What are you doing? Get out of me!" Han Sen shouted angrily. Do you think I want to do this? If you hadn't pushed me into this, I wouldn't have performed Return to Origin to combine with your body. I am one of the Extreme King. You should feel honored to have my body combine with the body of a rubbish race like yours. Weird. You have some blood of the Extreme King within you. Even God is helping me. It's weak, but it's better than nothing though. The king's voice echoed within Han Sen's body. It was like Han Sen's own cells were screaming at him. Han Sen felt depressed. If he had known that this would happen, he wouldn't have stopped the guy. He would have just let him walk away. The man who claimed to be Prince 16 wasn't using some skill that could take over a person's mind. His technique allowed him to merge their cells and attempt to combine their very bodies. "So you really are Prince 16? Han Sen asked, using some of his power to fight back against the invasion of his body. My name is Bai Yi," said the voice. "My prince, how about this? Let's pretend that nothing happened between us. You get out of my body, and we both go our separate ways," Han Sen said. "Are you scared now? It's too late. Once the Return to Origin starts, not even I can reverse it. I will have to overtake your body," Bai Yi said with a cold grunt. "Think of a way to stop it." Han Sen tried repeatedly to remove his enemy. Neither Jade Skin nor his Blood Pulse Sutra could stop the invasion of that power. "There is no need to waste your breath. I told you. This is Return to Origin. I have now become a part of you. I will be you. I will sink into your cells and even your genes. And then, I will replace your cells and your genes. And then you will become me," Bai Yi said with grim certainty. "Isn't this something like a village surrounding a city?" Han Sen felt depressed. When ordinary creatures tried to take over his body, they usually ended up in his sea of soul. But this guy was doing things the opposite way. He was starting to combine with Han Sen from the body, which kept him from going into the sea of soul, where he would be destroyed by the black crystal armor. Right now, Bai Yi's original Water King body was inside Han Sen's cells. If Han Sen wanted to get rid of him, he'd have to destroy his own cells. But that also meant he would have to destroy his body. It put him in a difficult situation. When the original Water King body started to replace Han Sen's own cells, he felt the change. "Enjoy the final moments of your life. You will soon become me, and I will take all your things. That includes your body, your will, and even your memories. Everything belonging to this body will become mine," Bai Yi said with a cold laugh. "You are too naive." Han Sen chuckled. He used spell, and a mysterious symbol appeared on his forehead. The solidifying power of eternity covered his body. It cemented his body as it was, forbidding any changes. "What kind of power is this?" Bai Yi screamed in shock. Han Sen didn't answer. He spread his eternity solidifying powers all over himself. His body became solid and unchangeable, halting Bai Yi's invasion in its tracks. It solidified Bai Yi's original Water King body as well. It couldn't invade Han Sen's cells any further, and it couldn't retreat either. But eternity's solidifying properties could only lock things down as they were. It was unable to erase the original Water King body that had already established its encroaching presence. "Bai Yi, you better answer my question. Otherwise, don't take it out on me for being cruel to you." Han Sen rose out of the lava valley and found a hidden place where he could speak to Bai Yi. "You cannot scare me," Bai Yi hissed back. "Although your power might have stopped the process of Return to Origin, your own body has been paused too. You can't remain like this forever, and you can't do anything about my presence here." "Are you really Prince 16? Han Sen asked curiously, ignoring what Bai Yi had said. "It's true. Ask around if you want, and you will learn much of my famous name," Bai Yi sounded cocky. You are a prince, so what are you doing in Knight's Paradise? And why are you fighting to claim a metal doll? Han Sen asked, knowing that something odd had to be going on. Knight's Paradise was a place that was set up for the royal guards. Ordinary royal children would never go there. And it seemed rather absurd for a prince to fight Han Sen over the ownership of a Duke metal doll. This was Han Sen's first time there. So it all seemed just a little bit too coincidental. It is because of that bitch Bai Ling Shuang, Bai Yi growled. Otherwise, why would I even come here? When Han Sen heard this, he understood. Bai Ling Shuang was Princess 10. She was the one that Bai Wei had a strong distaste for. Han Sen thought about it. He had met Bai Wuchang in the space station. And now he was meeting Bai Yi here. There was no way these two incidents were purely coincidental. He was afraid that the incident with Bai Wuchang had transpired because of Bai Ling Shuang's meddling. Although he had never seen Bai Ling Shuang before, he sort of understood what the woman was capable of doing. Bai Ling Shuang told you to kill me? Han Sen asked. Not exactly. Anyway, I am going to exact my revenge on that cheap bitch. Bai Yi obviously didn't want to talk about it. Bai Ling Shuang must have set him up. And now things had obviously gone much farther than he had intended. Both because of Han Sen and Bai Ling Shuang. These events would be forever branded into Bai Yi's heart. He must have really wanted both of them dead for different reasons. But these are all matters for the future. Let's talk about you and me right now. You want to take over my body, don't you? Well, that's impossible. Tell me what you are planning to do next, Han Sen said. Bai Yi snorted in annoyance. Return to origin is a one-way ticket once it has been triggered. This is a process that you can never reverse. I will take over you. It is only a matter of time. And from this point on, you will not be able to gain power. Sooner or later, your body will submit and become mine. Are you sure there is no other way? Han Sen asked seriously. Only one of us can be left alive, Bai Yi replied calmly. He was very confident in the abilities of his return to origin. I was going to let you live, but if you don't want to live, then just know that you've done this to yourself. Han Sen sighed. Killing a prince in King's kingdom was quite a crazy thing to do. King Bai would obviously come to investigate the matter. There were too many elites among the extreme king. Many of them, like Mr. White, had powerful predictive talents. So Han Sen couldn't be sure that he could keep Bai Yi's murder a secret. He didn't dare to kill a prince when his deed could be discovered. Or at least, he wouldn't if he didn't have a choice. You cannot kill me. I am Prince 16. I am the son of King Bai. Bai Yi's voice vanished. Under the thumb of Han Sen's super god spirit body, his original Water King body was refined in no time. A moment later, the original Water King body became a drop of water that was as transparent as a small diamond. Mutant Xenogenic King hunted. Original Water King. Mutant Xenogenic gene found. Feeling rather weak, Han Sen exited his super god spirit mode. When his body and level increased, the time he could use super god spirit body tended to increase as well. But even so, the effort cost him a lot of power. It was very difficult for him to maintain his super god spirit mode for any length of time. If I become deified, I wonder if I will be able to use super god spirit mode for a long time. Han Sen thought to himself. Then he swallowed the drop of water and used his Blood Pulse Sutra and Blood Pulse Plunder to refine it. It was similar to the ordinary process of refining things like the dragon wings and the stone cow. After the Blood Pulse Sutra refined the water drop, Han Sen obtained a new Blood Pulse gene power. But this time, it was a king-class Blood Pulse gene power. Han Sen's heart leaped. He felt his body become transparent liquid, and it looked as if he was made of water. Is this the power of original Water King body? Han Sen was so happy. He used his body to separate the ripples and waves of the water. He created a water area-off effect attack. It was exactly the same as the one Bai Yi had used on him. If I can nab a few more mutant King Xenogenic genes, or even a deified mutant Xenogenic gene, then I will be invincible. Han Sen really loved the combination of the Blood Pulse Sutra and Blood Pulse Plunder. But Han Sen felt a headache coming on when he thought about the ramifications of Bai Yi's death. He had earned this benefit by killing Bai Yi. But King Bai would definitely start an investigation. It would be difficult to use his new ability without drawing suspicion. Bai Ling Shuang would be aware that Bai Yi had encountered Han Senator, even if Bai Ling Shuang did not know. The Extreme King would surely have someone like Mr. White in their midst. Perhaps some special Geno art out there would help them deduce that Han Sun really was the one who killed Bai Yi. Han Sun used his Dongxian aura and Purple Eye Butterfly to erase any trace of him being there. He could take comfort in the knowledge that Super God Spirit Mode wouldn't leave any evidence behind. No one should be able to find out exactly what transpired there. Super God Spirit Body truly left nothing behind. It was impossible for him to be found out by a mere Geno art. But Bai Yi had died where Han Sun had appeared, and there weren't many guards going to Planet King Kong. Even if they had no evidence of him being responsible, King Bai might just decide to slay any and all suspects just for the hell of it. Han Sun didn't stay on Planet King Kong any longer. He retrieved the body of the metal doll and left. He needed to figure out a way to escape the realm of the Extreme King, if his murder of Bai Yi was ever exposed. In fact, staying there was too dangerous already. Han Sun left Planet King Kong and returned to the space station. There, he waited for an airship that would take him away from Knight's Paradise. A woman approached and sat next to Han Senator. She looked right at him. "Brother 16, you used Return to Origin?" the woman asked with shock. Han Sen's heart jumped, and he tried to replicate Bai Yi's voice. He coldly said, "That Han Sun was quite good to force me to do this. Bai Ling Shuang, did you try to trick me?" Bai Ling Shuang laughed. "Brother 16, you made the decision to go there. It's not my fault that things turned out this way. But by combining yourself with Han Sr., I can tell you that you now look much better." Bai Ling Shuang. Han Sen's face was hard. He used original Water King body, and his entire body transformed into transparent water. The Water King Arioff effect spread to envelop the entire space station. "Brother 16, why are you so angry?" Bai Ling Shuang stood inside the Arioff effect, but she seemed completely undisturbed. It was like the scary spread of water had no effect on her. Blue light shone around Bai Ling Shuang, and her beautiful smile and sexy body made her look like a goddess that had descended from the sky. It looked as if nothing in the world could make her dirty. Bai Ling Shuang's blue light spread, and it froze Han Sen's water Arioff effect. She waved a hand and cracked it, allowing the shards to spill all over the floor. Han Sun was shocked. Bai Ling Shuang was half deified. She was at the very top of her league too. She was far stronger than Bai Yi. Bai Ling Shuang broke the Arioff effect, and then the blue light faded away. She said quietly, "You did what you had to do. I won't forget what I promised you. 2 nights from now, go to Night Charm Town. I won't pay you any less than the sum we discussed." After that, Bai Ling Shuang turned to leave. After taking 2 steps, though, she thought of something. She turned around and said, "Brother 16, since you have merged with Han Sen's body, you should use his identity while you can. What do you want now?" Han Sun snarled. The woman flicked one of her blonde locks away from her forehead and smiled. Han Sun brought a half-deified Xenogeneic with him. "You should go and take everything he has. I saw the Xenogeneics, and their genes are good. One of them could be deified. You could gain a lot by nabbing a Xenogeneic like that. You don't have to tell me that. I know what to do." Han Sun looked at her with contempt. "Remember, in 2 days, Night Charm Town." Bai Ling Shuang smiled and said nothing more. She stood up and left the space station. Han Sen's head swam with confusion. This was a complicated situation, and now he had to make a decision. Bai Ling Shuang thought Bai Yi was Han Senator and ordinary Duke really couldn't have endured what Han Sen had. Not even most king-class elites would have survived Bai Yi's hand. The only good thing for Han Sun was that Bai Yi had used his Return to Origin. Bai Ling Shuang knew this. After he used Return to Origin, Bai Yi would look just like Han Senator. He would eventually change back to his original appearance, but it would be a slow process. Now that Han Sun had the original Water King body, he could keep up his disguise as Bai Yi. He could be mistaken for Prince 16 of the Extreme King. This would be much safer than King Bai learning that Bai Yi was dead. If Bai Yi had succeeded with Return to Origin, then he could have claimed everything belonging to Han Sun. including his memories. But Han Sun had only refined Bai Yi's mutant gene. He had the original Water King body, but none of the man's memories. Attempting to keep up his disguise as Bai Yi would be risky. There was still a good chance of him being exposed. There's nothing else I can do though. I have to try. Han Sun tried to calm down, and he thought about what to do next. He didn't want to draw any more suspicion, but Han Sun didn't know anything about Bai Yi. From his short time of observation, Bai Yi was a man that didn't look too far ahead. Even so, I have to find the Blood Kirin and the others. Then I will have to go to Bai Yi's house. Han Sun made the decision in his heart. He wasn't going to hesitate. With what had happened, he had no choice but to try. Chapter 23-22, Pretending to be a prince on his way to Planet Wind Zone. Han Sun sent a coded message. Han Sun took a deep breath before typing in the number that he wanted to send the message to. It was the number that Mr. White had given him. Mr. White had told him that if there was an emergency, he could send a coded message to that number. Then, he would find a way to contact Han Sun back. The code was simple. Rather than explaining exactly what had happened, Han Sun simply said that there was an emergency. After sending the message, Han Sun waited patiently. Half an hour later, his communicator came to life. An unknown number had sent him a message. Han Sun opened it. Again, this message was written in code. Han Sun read it and understood what he was being told. Go along with it. The information you need is in his house, and you must go there tonight. Han Sun read, and his jaw hit the floor. Mr. White knew that Han Sun had killed Bai Yi, and on top of that, he knew that Han Sun was currently disguising himself as Bai Yi. When the message said his house, it must have been referring to Bai Yi's home. Even with his coded message translated, no one would know what the message was referring to. Although he didn't know how Mr. White had found out, Mr. White wanted him to keep pretending, and that meant he might succeed with the ruse. The information Mr. White was alluding to had to be information concerning Bai Yi. If Han Sun managed to get that information, he might learn more about Bai Yi, and that would make the charade easier for him. The major problem at the moment was that he didn't know anything about Bai Yi. He currently didn't even know where the man lived. He didn't know if anyone else lived in the man's home, or if he had any friends. He didn't have a single clue. If he just went there boldly, Han Sun feared his identity would be exposed. And as for the information Mr. White was talking about, Han Sun didn't know where to find it. When Han Sun arrived back at Planet Wind Zone, Mr. White hadn't sent any more follow-up messages. He had already given Han Sun all the help he would be able to. Now Han Sun just had to do whatever he could. Han Sun looked up some information on Bai Yi, but what he found wasn't very detailed. He was King Bai's 16th son. He was good at manipulating water, and he was a very arrogant man. His mother was a siren, but she had died many years ago. Han Sun felt relieved. If Bai Yi's mother was still around, she would probably have exposed Han Sun the moment he met her. And in regards to King Bai, Han Sun wasn't really worried. King Bai had many children and grandchildren. Aside from the ones that he truly cherished, few ever saw him. Bai Yi wasn't one of the favored children. The Siren civilization had been destroyed, and Bai Yi's mother had run to the extreme king afterward. King Bai made her one of his wives. Bai Yi had no one living to support him, so he was just a run-of-the-mill prince. Bai Yi's talent wasn't too shabby, but he wasn't very famous amongst the princes. His temper was foul, and he was a very arrogant individual. He was greedy too. He didn't have much, and he wasn't fond of his father either. Because of that, his development was stunted. Although Bai Yi was older than Bai Wei, he hadn't actually gone much farther than she had. His planet had helped him become king class, but that was about it. There were no more resources that would allow him to get better. That was all Han Sun was able to learn. As for who was on Bai Yi's planet, and what friends he might have had, that was information he couldn't learn on the internet. And as for what the planet looked like, and what sort of buildings were there, Han Sun hadn't a clue. He hadn't seen a single image of the place. When he arrived on Planet Wind Zone, Han Sun ran to where the Blood Kirin was living. Bai Wei was currently still practicing in King's Garden, so she wasn't on Planet Wind Zone right then. Han Sun gathered Bauer, the Blood Kirin, and the Little Red Bird. Then they left the planet and took a ship to Bai Yi's Planet Water Zone. Planet Water Zone lived up to its name. The whole planet was covered in water, or at least most of it was. A few islands were visible, but they were easy to overlook. There were many creatures living in its sea, and Bai Yi's water element body was a good match for practicing there. Overall, it was a pretty nice planet. But Han Sun didn't see any towns on the planet's surface. He surmised that it must have been underwater. Han Sun was growing nervous. He didn't know where to find Bai Yi's underwater city. If he just randomly started poking around, he'd look like a pretty shady character. If he was Bai Yi, there was no way he would have forgotten the way home. He wouldn't just dive into the sea and swim around aimlessly. Han Sun entered Planet Water Zone's atmosphere, trying to figure out what he should do. Suddenly, someone jumped out of the water to greet Han Sr. "Who are you? Why have you come to Planet Water Zone?" The person shouted at Han. Senator Han Sun looked at the woman, taking in her blue hair and unusual body. The lady didn't look like one of the Extreme King. Her ears were like the blue gills of a fish. She had no proper legs either. Her lower body was the tail of a fish. She looked like one of the Ghana, but just a bit different. This must be one of the siren, Han Sun thought to himself. "You don't remember your prince?" Han Sun shouted coldly. He used his original Water King body and cast a water area-off effect to bind the siren lady and pull her towards him. "My prince, is that you?" The siren lady's eyes opened wide. She looked at Han Sun in shock. "My prince? You used Return to Origin? If you know that I have, then do not waste my time. Hurry down and tidy up. I'm going to need some privacy for a while as I take over the body," Han Sun said. Then he released the water AoE and let the siren lady go free. The siren lady looked frightened, and she said, "Yes, I will do it." After that, she flicked her tail and went swimming back into the depths of the sea. Han Sun silently followed her. He swam into the ocean and soon saw an underwater city residing beneath the waves. It was like something out of a fairy tale. The entire city was wrapped in a holy blue light that separated it from the water. It looked rather amazing. Of course, the environment here is far better than the environment of Planet Wind Zone, Han Sun thought to himself. He followed the girl into the underwater city. Surprisingly, when he entered, he found that the pretty underwater city was actually dirty and full of garbage. Many buildings were run down and dilapidated. Millions could have lived in that underwater city, but when he entered the city proper, there was no one living there aside from the siren lady, whose name was Lily. It looks like this Prince 16 wasn't living a good life either, Han Sun thought to himself. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.